Looks like we're ready.
Okay, great. Everyone, this is Mayor Harmon. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the City Council, also acting as a sustainable groundwater agency, to order, and state that all council members are present via teleconferencing. And I also like to let everybody know that the study session regarding the Public Safety Center was pulled from the agenda last week to make sure that there were adequate time to discuss the process to fill the vacant council mayor position. So that item will not be on our agenda tonight. And city manager, perhaps when you do your city manager's report, or maybe even right now, someone can let us know when that is going to be back on the agenda. Derek or city clerk, when is that going to be on the agenda?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think that depends on a lot of factors about the process that the council decides to take. So I'll be able to advise the council on the timing of that probably at the conclusion of tonight's meeting, depending on how a few items are ultimately resolved.
Thank you for that. Then with that, we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance and ask Council Member Marks to please lead us in that.
Thank you. Now, please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And with that, we will move to the city manager for the city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I have a short presentation tonight. I wanted to first just let you know we are working on our council agenda packets. As you know, we switched to our new format, and I think we've lost some of the indexing for attachments, and we've gotten some feedback from the council and the community. And so we'll be bookmarking those attachments. I know a lot of us, including myself, are fond of those bookmarks to quickly go to those attachments. And also at the same time, we'll be linking items that are in the reading file. I know it gets confusing when you get packets that are 500, 600, 900 pages long. And so please continue to give us feedback. We're aim to please the council and make sure that we're giving you the information that ultimately is digestible and accessible for all of you. On a couple areas I want to talk about is the 21-22 benchmark compensation study. This is part of your major city goal and one of our commitments to one of our labor partners, SLOCIA. We expect to present the findings of that compensation study in February of 2022, and just before we come back with the mid-year report. I'll share that the city's last benchmark compensation studies were in 2007, 2008, and then in 2014 and 2015. All of you have heard about the Great Resignation. It is real. I can tell you about it firsthand, that people are making lots of decisions about where they want to be moving forward. And we know moving forward that we're going to need to be aligned with our compensation philosophy to provide competitive compensation, a part of our overall strategy to retain qualified employees who exemplify our organizational values. There is a lot of competition for employees these days, and we want to be an employer of choice, given all of the complex, challenging issues that we have for our city. And so I'm excited to bring this back. As many of you know who've been receiving updates from HR, we have a team of employee representatives that are working with HR on many different factors, whether it's our benchmark cities or the methodology that we're using, the positions that we've selected for the study itself. All of this requires an incredible amount of collaboration, and HR has been doing a great job partnering with our labor leaders. Moving to COVID-19 updates, you all know that the Delta surge has led to unfortunate impacts to our hospital capacity, which I'll talk about more here in a moment. The county health officer, Dr. Penny Bornstein, issued a order requiring masking in all indoor places starting on September 1st. You will see downtown throughout the city signs on city light poles. We took those down in June, and now we're putting them back up because as we had forecasted to the council and based on what we heard from a lot of public health specialists is we'll see this dial up and dial down. From what I'm seeing anecdotally in my experience is that we're seeing a lot of good mask adherence. It isn't 100% perfect. And so I would encourage folks to call our business assistance hotline, and we will send our code enforcement folks out there to assist folks with understanding what the requirements are for adhering to the public mask order. Masks are required indoors for all city in all city vehicles and for all employees, regardless of vaccination status, with the exception if you're in an office by yourself. I'll share with you as of September 7th, 69% of our regular and contract employees have completed the attestation, and there may be others that have been vaccinated, just haven't let us know. And so we're making some progress in that front, and I'll continue to keep the council updated. Daily infections and testing, this is the overall forecast that's put out by IHME. It's for the whole state of California and not for our county. We don't have access to that specific data. But what you can see on this upper chart is that flattening that we've been talking about after of daily infections after the peak, and perhaps a little bit of an uptick as we start to get around the holiday season. And we'll continue to monitor that. Today, Dr. Fauci talked about the new variant that they're watching, the Mu variant, and we'll see ultimately how that progresses through our community. Hospital resources usage, we saw that peak just back at the end. It didn't seem like too much of a peak in August, and then flattening out again over the next couple of months. So we see that kind of continuing. The only way to change that is for people to get vaccinated. If we want to stop the spread, we need everyone to get vaccinated as soon as possible. I was shared a story today by one of our city employees who got vaccinated, fortunately, had a breakthrough case and had a pretty severe reaction to COVID. And they attribute really their survival due to the fact that they got vaccinated and the disease did not have a greater impact on them. So this is something we've all read about, but just to read about it firsthand, and one of our city employees who's providing frontline services was really impactful on me. And I hope it has an impact on everyone who's watching tonight about what you can do to get vaccinated and ultimately stop the spread. So where are we with total caseload in the county? Just north of 26,000 cases. California cases just close to 4.5 million. I believe this past weekend we surpassed the 40 million mark of total cases in the United States and about 225 million cases worldwide. We've had 345 cases reported for this last week. 1,602 active cases, and that's an important number for us to continue to monitor. Most of those have been recovered, but we still continue to see deaths in our community from those that are ultimately hospitalized. In terms of where's ICU availability, it stands at 45%. Total ICU beds remains at 38. 21 beds are occupied in the ICU and 16 with COVID-19. And total 54, 16 in the ICU. And that 54 includes those from our county that are down at Marion Hospital down in Santa Maria. And of course, you probably, if you listened to the county press conference last week, this is starting to impact normal health service operations, whether it's elective or other types of surgeries. So can't stress so much about how important it is to get vaccinated to try to make sure that we maintain that healthcare capacity that we need, whether it's a car accident or you just need general care. We need that capacity in our local hospitals. We have seen some progress in the state of California. We're up to 67.3% people fully vaccinated, about 10% people partially vaccinated. Unfortunately, California is not leading the country. There are states that are ahead of us, particularly states in the northeastern part of the United States. We have a fair amount of doses on hand. Some of those doses are set to expire. So you may be hearing a little bit of chatter about how some of those doses, that they don't want to allow those to perish, and are evaluating whether or not those can be used for vulnerable populations for potential booster shots. Here locally in San Luis Obispo County, we're north of 300,000. I think that number last time was about 310. So we've had an additional 7,000 people or so vaccinated since the last time we presented this information. And with that, Madam Mayor, that concludes my presentation for tonight. We have not activated our Emergency Operations Center. None of the other cities have activated their EOCs. The county continues to operate its COVID-19 operations as a DOC or Department Operating Center. So you'll see the notes coming from the county as the CHADOC. And so we'll continue to monitor operations, and we'll take actions as we deem necessary.
All right, thank you so much for that. After I made my announcement that I'm going to be stepping away from this position, I had several people reach out to me concerned about the DEI major city goal and just all of our equity efforts, and just wanting to make sure, since those are new and since they associate me with those things, to make sure that those are solid and that we're really moving forward with those. And so I know that I let you know earlier today that I was going to be asking this question so that the community can understand where we're at with those efforts, where we're at with hiring. I don't know if it's a director or a manager or an equity person that's going to be leading those efforts in the city. So if you could give us an update on that so that the community has an understanding of where we're at with those efforts. Councilmember Pease, did you need to interject?
Well, I had a question about the COVID report. Should I ask now, or do you want to wait?
No, we can wait, and yeah, Derek can answer this question, then we can go back to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm forward to that. Thank you so much. And
no, Andy, I'm sorry. Let's wait for that.
You meant the other way. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but yeah. Why don't we hold on that for 1 second, Andy, and then let Derek will take this one, and then we'll go back to that if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Madam Mayor. The diversity, equity, inclusion is still a major city goal for the city of San Luis Obispo, and the budget allocations of over $2.1 million will continue. We are making progress on our major city goal. We are doing a lot of work internally as an organization, whether that's moving forward with the assessment that was done on our city organization. I believe we've shared with the council that we did hire a recruiter because we felt it was important to get a professional recruiter on board, just given the need for someone to really understand and be attracted to the type and range of the major city goal with DEI. I anticipate the recruitment to kick off just around November, middle of November, early December, and that we hopefully will have someone on board January, February. So we will continue to make progress on that major city goal, and we'll be coming back to the city council at our second meeting in February of 2022 to talk about the progress we've made on all the major city goals, including the DEI goal itself.
Okay, great. And can you remind me, who will that person be reporting to, and how will they, I know this is but since it's come up, I want to understand it and make sure the community understands it. It's like, how will that work in the organization, and who will they be reporting to, so to speak?
This position will report directly to the city manager. So it is, at least from a lot of our research, our conclusions are really like the success that I believe we've had with climate action, then and also with natural resources and our impact on open space, is that placing the position in essentially the city manager's office provides a lot of authority and influence to really bring about the change that you need within the organization, but also then to be able to carry those policy issues forward with a fair amount of momentum that has the impact on the greater community. And so that's what we described in the major city goal. We placed the position in the city manager's office. As you all know, I was heavily involved in the DEI task force and have a lot of the institutional knowledge about all the conversations and the learning sessions we had with our partners in the community. And I believe that this will help provide a lot of context and direction for what ultimately who lands in that spot, and ultimately be able to move forward with some of these initiatives with hopefully some success.
All right, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. Yes, great question and response. On the COVID, I'm wondering with either at the county level or the city level, if there's been discussion of establishing some metrics for certain mandates, so we know ahead of time. That was one of the benefits of the tiers, even though there was some challenges with it. It was great for the community to know these numbers mean this kind of response, whereas with this one, this round, we felt like there was a lot of angst and, concern, and the community wasn't sure, is a letter writing campaign a good way to influence whether or not there's going to be a mask mandate, or are there going to be other restrictions? If if it does get worse again, then what are the next steps and what will be those trigger points, whether it's ICU capacity or infection rates or something else? What is there talk of trying to proactively set some targets and have that published?
Great question, and the short answer is no. I haven't been privy to any conversations at the county level of establishing any sort of objective standards for enacting public health measures. Of course, we're all familiar with that related to the state blueprint, where the state essentially centralized that role and authority. That was the direction we were heading in with our local roadmap, but you recall the state stepped in and said, no, 58 counties, we're going to handle this statewide. We'll have to see ultimately where this goes. And certainly I'm happy to have conversations through our bi-weekly calls with the CHADOC to see perhaps is there any intention of establishing any standards. We did reach out to some of the mortuaries, where areas where we do have jurisdiction, to see how are they faring with the level of infections and the unfortunate mortality associated with it. We haven't heard that we need to do anything here locally, but nevertheless, we'll circle back with Dr. Bornstein to see is there any metrics that we can have in mind that we can share, that she should be thinking through in terms of measures that we can prepare for and communicate collectively to the community.
That would be great. I appreciate hearing about that. Maybe we can get some feedback at the next meeting. Thank you.
Councilmember Christensen.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple words in relationship to your question and from your constituents, and Derek's answer regarding our DEI task force and major city goals. I did want to remind you to remind your constituents or anybody else out there listening that there's 4 of us still left on the council, although I congratulate you on your actually wonderful new position. Appreciate that. There are 4 of us still left on this council who all of us supported strongly our DEI task force and goals, strongly supported the work of the DEI task force. We have a vice mayor who will remain, who is not only a member of that DEI task force making that city goal recommendation, but is our first Black elected city council member. So one of the things that could be done is to just remind folks that they can always reach out to any of the rest of us and or a city website, which has a lot of good information too. So just want to make sure people understand there's lots of avenues to get information, and not just through our admittedly great outreach that our mayor has done.
Thank you for that. That was good reason to bring this all up publicly so people can hear all of that. So hopefully that was useful. I'm not seeing any other hands. And do we have any public comment. I guess I'm trying to remember if we have public comment on this item.
No one. No, we do
Okay.
not.
All right, great. All right. Then with that, I will move on to a proclamation declaring September 18th, 2021 as National Museum Day to John Ashbaugh on behalf of the History Museum of San Luis Obispo. Whereas the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. has declared September 18th, 2021 as National Museum Day and urged all levels of government to celebrate the museums with their jurisdiction. And whereas within the city of San Luis Obispo, there are 7 public museums offering exhibits to help our residents and visitors understand the broad scope of human history and culture of the Central Coast. And whereas the city of San Luis Obispo commends these notable organizations, which include the History Center of San Luis Obispo, the Railroad Museum, Old Mission Museum and Gift Shop, Central Coast Veterans Museum, the SLO City Firefighters Museum, the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art, and the Children's Museum. And whereas the public access to the artifacts, exhibits, documents, and artwork representing our diverse heritage is essential to sustaining the values, spirit, and principles of our democracy. And whereas it is the policy of the city of San Luis Obispo to promote the knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of the city's distinctive character, cultural resources, and history. Now, therefore, I, Heidi Harmon, Mayor of the City of San Luis Obispo, on behalf of the entire City Council, hereby proclaim Saturday, the 18th, 2021, as National Museum Day in the City of San Luis Obispo, and urge residents and visitors to explore the rich diversity of our community's history by visiting one of our museums on September 18th or any other day during visiting hours. Is John here?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Hi. Mayor Harmon and members of the council, thank you very much for proclaiming Saturday, September 18th, the National Museum Day in San Luis Obispo. I know you've got a busy agenda, so I've abbreviated my remarks here. This campaign is a national effort by the Smithsonian Institute in Washington to proclaim a date every year as National Museum Day throughout the country. Hundreds of museums throughout the nation provide free admission to their facilities on that date. Now, for our part, of course, our admission is always free, but we are planning to open our newest exhibit on the generations of Jewish community in San Luis Obispo County the following week. All of us should be very proud of the 7 museums in San Luis Obispo that have regular visitor hours, and you've cited them. I won't repeat them all. I'll just note that our History Center operates actually 2 of them, the County Museum in the Carnegie Library next door to the Mission in the downtown, as well as the Dalladea Adobe and the Gardens, which we operate as a house museum. Would note too, your City County Library across Palm Street from your council chambers hosts a regular rotating exhibit in its main lobby. The current exhibit there features the centennial of the 19th Amendment that guaranteed women's suffrage throughout the United States. Our own exhibit we're planning for the soft opening on Monday, September 20th, is called L'Dor V'Dor, Generations of Jewish Community on the Central Coast. It's been 3 years in development, and it prominently features the late Marion Wolf and her husband, Paul, along with several other leading Jewish business and civic leaders in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Well, we also invite you all to join us for the next in our quarterly Carnegie Lectures this Friday, September 10th, 5:30 p.m. in person at our museum in the Carnegie Library or via Zoom, focusing this time on the Rios Caledonia Adobe up in San Miguel, which is operated by the Friends of the Adobe. It's a wonderful small museum, a very pleasant little county park sandwiched between Highway 101 and the railroad tracks there. If you'd like to know more about them, I invite you to visit their website, the historic Rios Caledonia Adobe. And if you'd like to know more about National Museum Day, please consult the Smithsonian webpage. I'll place that link in the chat room here for you. Thanks again. We look forward to seeing you at our museum or at any of the various museums in throughout the Central Coast, the Dalladea Adobe, which we're also going to continue open over the weekends here throughout the month of September. And good luck, Madam Mayor, on your next adventure. I'm sure it'll be of benefit to us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that personally, and thank you for sharing that with the community. Yeah, I every week I keep thinking I'm going to go to the Dalladea and do my reading there instead of at home, but I never make it. So thank you for that reminder.
You're always welcome.
Yeah, it's a great, if you have not been to any of these spaces, I highly recommend it, but the Dalladea Adobe might be a very underappreciated spot. And you can go and bring a little picnic, I think, right? A little lunch if you want, and a book, and spend a couple hours. It's gorgeous. I really recommend it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your work with all of that. All right, now we will move on to public comment. This is for items not on the agenda. City Clerk, do we have any folks here to speak on public comment?
Yes, we have one person, Peter Williams. I'm going to move him over.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor Harmon, City Council. My name is Peter Williamson, and I'm here to give you a sneak listen at our fall campaign for commuters. So most of SLO City knows the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments is our region's agency responsible for transportation planning and funding. We have a number of programs aimed at making our transportation system more efficient, such as the Safe Routes to School, for the K through 12, and then like the Back and Forth Club for the commuters. And if I asked you to ride the bus tomorrow, what would you think? You might say, forget it. You might wonder where you should catch the bus. How do you make sure you're not going in the wrong direction? These are all questions that I answered for myself a couple of years back. So starting October 1st, we want to invite everyone to take the confidence quiz for a chance to win a zipline tour for 4. And the quiz optionally allows you to request resources and more information, and we'll mail those out. Also, logging your transportation choices always helps the region with planning and programming. And maybe you're working from home. Those trips count too. You can log your trips at irideshare.org during the month of October for a chance to win a $250 gift card. It's like a full body massage couples kind of situation. And then also International Walk to School Day is October 6th. So if you or a friend can help us coordinate a walking or biking celebration at Pacheco Elementary, Bishop's Peak Elementary, or SLO High, please contact me at info@rideshare.org. All the other schools are confirmed. We'll probably get 100% of the schools rewarding kids that walk and bike that day. So get out with the whole family again on October 6th. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to state for the record that I'm happy to continue to be involved in walk to school, ride to school, ride around town, ride to work, walk to work, stay at home, and just be nice all those days. So if there's anything I can do to support any of that moving forward, regardless of my role, I'm happy to do that. So thank you for the work that you and SLOCOG are doing on all of those things. All right. All right, that's it. Now we're moving on to the consent agenda. This is for items deemed to be non-controversial. Is there anyone here to speak on consent? Not seeing any hands. So would someone like to make a motion, or are there any colleagues that would like to say anything on consent? Councilmember or Vice Mayor Stewart, and also Councilmember Pease. Or I don't know if you're motioning or speaking, but.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to all the people who applied for the advisory bodies for the Parks and Rec Commission and the Human Relations Committee, and really excited to bring on Chris Rodebush and Stephanie Carlotti. And I'd be happy to move the consent agenda if there's no further discussion.
Councilmember Pease?
Yeah, I'd be happy to second that, and just want to give a shout out to some of the, as always, and that you often rightfully point out, Mayor, the great things that happen on the consent agenda. The groundwater, our SLO groundwater basin management plan is out for its final public comment period. And then the new historic inventories for our great esteemed late Mr. Schwartz. So to be able to see those recognized and kind of a recognition of modern architecture that is historically significant. It's a really neat piece, and I look forward to having some ways for the community to recognize all the historic resources that we've been able to add to the inventory.
Thank you, Councilmember Pease. The consent agenda is where a lot of the really actually good stuff is it's sort of like an Oreo cookie. There's all this crunchy, sometimes hard stuff. And in the middle of that is this gooey, delicious center that is the consent agenda that people should also pay a lot of attention to. All right. I think that was a motion and a second. City Clerk?
Vice Mayor Stewart,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease.
Yes.
Councilmember Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yes.
Mayor Harmon.
Yes, and with that, it passes 5-0. And now we will move on to an item to approve a process to fill a council, in this case, mayor vacancy. And then before we do that, though, I'll just say the Deputy City Manager Greg Herman and City Clerk Parrington are going to present the report. And while I do not have a financial or I think vested interest is the technical term, there is I recognize that there is a perception of interest on my part in this item. And so out of an abundance of caution, I think this is actually my first recusal in my whole almost 6 years of being mayor. So I'm pretty excited about it, recusing myself. And so I'm just going to turn my video off, correct? And so I can still hear and I'll know when to come back in so after the vote, I'll be right back. And until that time, Vice Mayor Stewart can take over.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and council members. The process for filling a vacant mayor or council member seat is really clearly defined in the city charter and council policies and procedures. And we're very lucky to have a great staff in the city clerk's office who will be taking us through that process. They will, of course, be led by our city clerk, Teresa Parrington, and I'm happy to hand it over to her to discuss the details of the process and the options that are available for the council.
Thank you, council members. The recommendation is to approve a process to fill the vacancy on the city council resulting from the resignation of Mayor Heidi Harmon, which becomes effective September 26, 2021. The Charter Section 406 governs the filling of the vacancy. It states the council, by a majority of its remaining members, shall appoint a qualified person to fill the vacancy. If the council fails to fill the vacancy within 30 days following its occurrence, meaning the vacancy, it shall call a special municipal election to fill that vacancy. The election can be called no sooner than 90 days from the occurrence and no later than 150 days. The process for which the appointment is made is outlined in our council policies and procedures. Section 3.3.1 just repeats the Section 406 of the Charter. Section 3.3.2 says that all phases of the process must be done in public. Section 3.3.3 says that 10 days prior to the first meeting where the council will discuss the appointments must be published in the newspaper. And in that notice, we will be requesting applications be filed prior to the meeting. Section 3.3.4 lists qualifications, which are pretty much the same, exactly the same as those when someone runs for council. The first one being they must have residency in the city 30 days prior to the appointment. They must be a registered voter in the city of San Luis Obispo. Those are the two requirements that are outlined in our elections code. In addition to those two qualifications, any applicant must submit a written statement of up to 500 words describing the amount of time available to devote to the city council, reason for wanting the appointment, their involvement in the community in the preceding 23-month, and then any prior experience in government or areas associated with government business. Section 3.3.5 outlines that it's in a public meeting. So it's an open public meeting. It outlines how applications are given. So applications must be provided to council and made available to the public at least 4 days prior to the meeting. The public may submit written comments up to 24 hours prior to the meeting. All applicants will be given 5 minutes to make a presentation to the council. Nominations will be taken from the council members. All nominations, seconds, and voting shall be done in public. If the council is unable to reach consensus, that meeting may be adjourned to a subsequent meeting as long as it's within 30 days of the vacancy. And that date would be October 27, 2021. That would be the day, if a decision is not made, that a special election would be required to be called. So the next slides outline 2 timelines for the process to appoint to fill the vacancy. These were both outlined in detail in the staff report and in the agenda correspondence. The end-to-end process, which has council accepting applications for mayor, reviewing those applications, making an appointment, and if needed, and if a seated council member is appointed, to have that process repeat all over again from start to finish. That process, the end-to-end process, would take at least 2 months to complete. The second is a consolidated timeline. And the difference in this, the timelines are generally the same, except for when we do the notice of the vacancy, we would clearly state that we are going to be accepting applications for the mayor and or a city council member in the event that a seated council member is appointed to mayor. The deadlines are both the same in the consolidated process in the end-to-end for the first section. So they would be, all applications would have to be submitted to the city clerk's office either in person or by email by September 24th. They would be posted and available to the public and provided to council September 28th. Council would individually evaluate applications. And then on October 5th, would be the first meeting where council would consider the appointment for mayor. And then if a seated council member and you choose a consolidated process for the council member seat. And how and why we can do that is the oath of office is administered right after the vote on the mayor's appointment. And then if it is a seated council member, then that automatically creates the vacancy, which would allow you to go ahead and consider the council member seat. So in both cases, if council was unable to make a decision by October 27th, that is the date that would require a special election. Again, the special election must be held within 90 to 150 days of the vacancy, which would mean we would either have to have an election somewhere between December 26th and February 24th. So the process for the October 5th meeting would be that each applicant would be provided up to 5 minutes to make their presentation. We would have public comment, council deliberation. Council would provide nominations of each council member would provide nominations for 3 applicants. We would show the tally of those nominations live. Then if an applicant receives 3 or more nominations, a motion to appoint that person should be made. If more than one applicant receives 3 or more votes, then those applicants should be discussed to see if the votes could change. If no applicants get 3 or more votes, then the council can expand the list by engaging in additional rounds of listing applicants. A council member can propose a motion in favor of any applicant at any time. And again, if an applicant is appointed, the city clerk will administer the oath of office immediately and the appointment becomes effective immediately. So again, in the event that council cannot make an appointment, then the date that triggers a special election is October 27th. Again, the special election would need to happen 90 to 150 days within the vacancy, which is December 26th through February 24th. And it could be any day between those 2 dates. It just could be no sooner or no later than those dates. And estimated cost for a special election is between $150,000 and $200,000. This is based on our last special election, which was held in 2017. And I will note that that was done by the county. However, we are unsure at this time whether or not the county would even consider doing our special election. So it is more than likely possible that we would have to run our own. Those dollar estimates do not include staff time. That would just be for the outside consultant and rental of equipment that would be needed. So again, this recommendation is to approve the process to fill the vacancy on City Council resulting from the resignation of Mayor Harmon effective September 26, 2021. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Teresa. Councilmember Marks?
Yeah, I had a brief question about the 3 applicants in that process. Would we be rank ordering them, or would all 3 be the same? In other words, do we say my first choice, my second choice, my third choice?
They would all be the same. They all have the equal rating. It would just be a listing.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Pease?
Thank you for that. And in terms of the application itself, I noticed that there was a kind of a, mayor or council member checkbox, but would it be possible to tease those apart where folks could do a mayor application and then a separate council member application? They could choose the same words for their 500 word process, but they could also have something different rather than just the same application. Is that, I assume that works in the process that you have proposed?
Yes, and yeah, when we did modify that slightly so that it says in the event that the mayor's seat is filled by a seated council member, would you be interested in the council member seat? So yes, we could clarify that even further to make two separate lines for that.
Right, and so they could in fact submit a second essay for that other position, or anyway, that's a logistic
Yes.
we don't necessarily have to figure out tonight, but something along those lines. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So they would submit two 500 word documents if they wanted to.
If that's what the council would like, yes.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions from the council? All right, City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Good evening, everyone. This is Megan Wilbanks. I'm the Deputy City Clerk. I'm assisting Teresa tonight, checking out the request for public comment. The first person that I see is Jim Dantona. Jim, I'm going to transfer you over to a panelist. Please hang on just a moment.
Good evening, Madam Vice Mayor and City Council. Jim Dantona, President and CEO of the San Luis Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of our members, I'd like to begin my comments tonight by thanking and recognizing Mayor Heidi Harmon for her work and efforts for the past 5+ years on behalf of our community. We truly appreciate everyone who puts themselves out in front to help lead our community and works with passion to try to make our city a better place. And she has certainly done that. We also want to thank Mayor Harmon for her service on our Imagine SLO committee that helped facilitate our chamber economic vision that will guide our advocacy for the years to come. We certainly wish her all the best in her new role and know that she will continue to passionately advocate for climate change. Regarding this item on the agenda, the Chamber has been steadfast in its advocacy for responsible and sustainable fiscal decisions of taxpayer dollars. We've been thankful that this current council has done the hard work to make fiscally sustainable decisions, such as building a strong budget and supporting the recovery of our economy during COVID. We would ask you again tonight to continue that path and make the decision to utilize the appointment process to fill the mayor's position. The chamber doesn't endorse individual candidates, and once again, we are not advocating for any person, but spending $150,000 to $200,000 for a special election to fill the seat is a bad fiscal decision. Those funds will be better spent on infrastructure, programs, or debt pay down that will benefit the community for the long term. By normal course of business, in a little over 12 months, we will have an election for the position of mayor. So there's no need to spend the time, energy, and money right now on a special election. We believe that you should spend that energy on this public process for appointment and continuing efforts to ensure our community continues to successfully recover through this COVID pandemic. We really appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy City Clerk. Any additional public comment?
I'm not seeing any requests at this time.
Okay, thank you. I do have one more question, City Clerk. If there were the two different 500 words options for mayor, as a mayor candidate and a council candidate, would the individuals get 5 minutes to speak as a mayor and 5 minutes to speak as a council candidate?
That would be up to the council. If you would like to do that, they could.
Got it. Thank you. Councilmember Christensen?
Thank you. It took me a minute to find my mute button. I will just step right out on a limb and say that I fully support the idea of appointment. We have 4 experienced, some of us very long time council members, but even the newer ones are been here quite a while. I think we can certainly do a capable job of making an appointment, and I fully agree with the public comment we've had over the last week or so regarding not spending valuable city resources, whether it be time or money and other kinds of just emotional resources on a special election, given that we would be more than halfway through a term anyway by the time we got done with an election. And we just have, so many absolutely crucial things to be spending money on. The other reason is just because, I got on the council first through a special election, and I know how hard it is to work for, as a candidate when it's a special election, and because people are just not paying attention. And so you tend to have very low turnout anyway. And that's, that's a given. So you're not getting necessarily better representation of the community by having an election at this time when it's an off period. So I would support the appointment process, and I actually would support a consolidated appointment process so we could hopefully be done with it by the end of the meeting on the 5th and move on to the very many incredibly important agenda items that staff and we have been working on for so long, as always.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, Councilmember Christensen stole my lines. I just want to speak really in favor of the appointment, and also in terms of the consolidated schedule. I think it's really, I really commend staff for their efforts to read through all the statutes and the different policies and come up with a way that we could potentially move in an expeditious manner and get all 5 of us back again as a fully functional council. And I don't know if there would be items that come up where we are 2 and 2 with 4 of us on council. I couldn't predict that in a million years. But if that happens, what happens is just no action. You're like dead in the water. So we all really need to have 5 council members. So that's all I have to say for that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. And I agree that we can make an appointment. I think that was an important point by Councilmember Christensen in terms of that election in this moment wouldn't even necessarily get us any better representation. I think that's important to note. And so a consolidated process, I think that we can make an appointment with clarity for the mayor and be able to then be able to follow up as needed. I also want to, because I think it does matter in how we approach this piece, is that I personally, without deliberating on the specifics of an appointment, but that we have been considering the applications. And I just, I recognize, although I have expressed some initial interest in that post, in potentially applying for appointment. At this time, I feel that we have we're just so fortunate to have a deep bench at the council, and that we have the skills and experience and leadership amongst the team, and that there's potentially a natural transition as we move forward, being open to this whole process. But I just wanted to let folks know at this time on that as well.
Thank you. I definitely agree with my fellow council members. I thank you for City Clerk and City Attorney for moving forward so quickly and efficiently. One of the things that we always talk about with business versus government is how efficient can we be, and how we can save money when we can. And I think that this is a great example of how you were able to get through all of the details of being a charter city and what we need to do. So I also agree with my council members. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Pease, your hand's up. I didn't know if that's for the motion.
Sure, I'd be happy to move that we proceed with the consolidated appointment process.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. We have a first from our motion from Councilmember Pease and a second from Councilmember Christensen. Councilmember Marks, you were very close. Sorry about that. Deputy City Clerk, can you call the vote?
Before we call the vote, can I just get clarification? Do you only want separate 500-word statements, or do you want completely separate applications for mayor and for council member?
I think it's
ahead.
fine to do one application, but they can always attach a second essay if they want to. There's no problem with that. Yeah.
That would be my thought.
Okay. I would, well, I won't imagine stuff, but never mind. Just let it go.
But do we need to think that through in terms of the 5 minutes?
Yeah,
doing that twice, that seems.
I don't think people need to give us two 5-minute presentations. I would not want to do that. And I also think it makes for a very long evening, which isn't fair to the public or to us, frankly.
Right. So they can opt to either make it for the mayoral, and then if they are continuing it, then it would.
Yeah. Or they can, they can always address and say, hey, I'm up for either one, but I'm going to address my remarks, that addresses your concerns or your thoughts about either position, no matter which you might consider me for. It's, it'll be good practice for whoever it is up there.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes, I would like to just say if someone really only is interested in the council position, then there should be some way that they can make that clear at the beginning of the application, rather than waiting till we get all the way down to the end and then there's a box that they can check. So just perhaps putting that those two alternatives higher up in the application would be good. And also, I hope we can have all of this wonderful information in the staff report, if that can be a separate place to go on our website, so that if people are not listening to this meeting and they want to know the details, they'll have a good solid source of information.
Yes, it will all be posted on as a hot topic on the cover, and then of course linking to our elections page with full details, including a link to this meeting, a link to the staff report, and all of the application documents.
Good.
Madam Vice Chair, if I could just hop in for a minute, just to be clear. So pursuing the consolidated approach, we will look then to get you the applications by Tuesday, the 28th, just so that'll be the normal customary time, about a week ahead of the meeting. We will post those online as Ms. Purrington indicated. And I just want to point of clarification, just so for those that are watching, should the mayor be appointed from any of the seated council members, then it can currently then open up immediately a vacant council seat. And the intent of the council is then at that meeting, interview folks who have submitted applications for the mayor and or council seat to be interviewed at that meeting, and if selected, to be sworn in and for them to immediately take office on October the 5th. And just want to clarify that's the intent of the council, just so that there's no ambiguity about the process moving forward for those that are listening tonight.
So if they are interested in the council seat, they probably should look at the packet the week before. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they shouldn't have anything planned for that evening. They might be just up on that dais.
Virtual or otherwise.
Yes, and they shouldn't have anything planned for the next year either, if they're interested.
Great. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I'll just hop in and say Ms. Purrington's already reaching out to department heads. Many of you will recall that when you were elected into office, we quickly began departmental briefings so that we could get you all up to speed with operations, policies, projects, and programs. We're doing that to put placeholders on calendars, of course, subject to whoever's selected in their availability. But we're already moving forward with the traditional process that we use to try to orient new people that'll be serving as your colleagues.
Great work. Thank you so much.
Teresa,
Yes,
we haven't voted yet.
I know.
Any other questions?
No, I'm waiting to, keep unmuting and muting, so trying to figure out what.
Okay. Councilmember Pease.
Yes.
Councilmember Christensen.
Yes.
Councilmember Marks.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stewart.
Yes.
Okay.
Passes 4-1 recusal or abstention.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then I have some questions then. I'm a little bit confused about that. I was staying on extra to be sure that we could get everyone through the under 2 years from the last election date so that it wouldn't automatically kick off a special election. But if what's just been decided doesn't demand that, then I would like to ask clarification about that, please.
So Madam Mayor, your service would continue through the next meeting so your, as I understand it, your transition would happen on September the 26th, meaning that you would serve as mayor for our next meeting scheduled for September 21st. And then on the 5th, Vice Chair Stewart would then chair the meeting. And the first order of business would be for the selection of mayor. And if a sitting council person is selected as mayor, then selection for council. So your continued service would through the 21st would ensure we have a complement of full 5 council members through the appointment process that gets us to October 5th. Anything sooner would result in a gap, meaning that on the 21st of September, we wouldn't have a full complement, because part of what's required of the council is to have a full noticing period to solicit applications and then go through that process in order to line the council up for an appointment process in October.
Okay. I think I understand what you said, Derek, but all right, then we'll move on to the next item before us to review a tentative track map 3157 for 500 Westmont Drive. So Community Development Director Michael Codron and Associate Planner Kyle Van Leeuwen will please present the report.
Well, thank you, Mayor Harmon and members of the council. Good evening. I'm Michael Codron, Director of Community Development. And Kyle Van Leeuwen is an associate planner in our department. He'll be giving the presentation, and we'll share his screen momentarily to do so. This is a project that is an infill residential subdivision. We have a lot of public testimony and appreciate all the written correspondence that's been submitted. Also had a couple of planning commission hearings in support of this item where we were able to really understand the public input and had an opportunity to review everything and all the questions asked to this point. And I believe the presentation should cover most of those questions, but if anything, after the presentation, if the council has any further questions or details, we'd be happy to address those. And there are a number of staff members, issue area experts, and others in the audience available to support that conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to Kyle. And Kyle, go ahead and share your screen, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Thank you.
All right, I think I found the mute button. Can I be heard?
You're just a little faint, Kyle, so you might just speak up a little bit.
Let me start this. Okay, as stated, we are here to review a tentative track map to create a 23 residential lots on a almost 5-acre site within the low density residential zone. The project includes the extension of Stanford Drive, which will connect to an extension of Cuesta Drive, and an initial study mitigated negative declaration is proposed for adoption. Staff's upfront recommendation is to adopt a resolution approving tentative track map number 3157 and adopting the associated initial study and mitigated negative declaration. The project site is towards the north end of the city. It is, again, about 5-acre site. It is just west of Highway 1 from Westmont Avenue, and both the east and west portions of Westmont Avenue terminate into the site. Stanford Drive and Cuesta Drive also both end with a dead end street into the project site as well. In terms of the project description, this is a tentative track map that would create 23 residential lots and includes the extension of Stanford Drive and Cuesta Drive. It would install sidewalks and parkways. It has a plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure, a potential bike pedestrian connection to the east to Westmont. And it does include the removal of 86 trees and the retention of 91 trees on site. It's also worth noting that the creek setbacks are applied to the lots adjacent to the creek. The creek on this project site is not currently recognized in our conservation open space element, so it does not currently enjoy creek protection measures. Again, here is the project kind of highlighted over the project site. As you see, the extension of Stanford Drive kind of curves over to extension of Cuesta Drive. Here's the site again of the lots. Worth noting that the terminus of Westmont to the west is the access point for 3 of the lots. The termination point to the east of Westmont Avenue is access for 2 lots, meaning that 18 of the 23 lots do take access from this new street connection made here. There is some phasing involved with the application. The 2 sections of the project that would not include the creation of new streets would be kind of phase 1 and phase 2 or done at the same time. And then additional 2 phases to do the interior section. In terms of previous review, the Planning Commission did review the project on May 26th. The PC reviewed the project and continued the project hearing to allow for the completion of the 30-day public review period for the initial study and to allow for the staff to address some of the public comments brought up at that meeting. We returned to Planning Commission on July 28th. The PC did recommend adoption of the initial study mitigated negative declaration and recommended the approval of the project to council with the following additional conditions. They did ask that the compensatory tree plantings as recommended by the tree committee be carried out in the way that specific of the tree committee's request. And there was an additional condition after some public comment about creating a construction communication plan so that neighbors in the area would be aware of when construction would start in different phases of the project. PC also did ask for staff to provide to City Council kind of a further analysis of traffic and circulation. There is a pretty thorough evaluation of the traffic and circulation proposed in the staff report. In terms of the project's consistency with the subdivision regulations, the minimum lot size for residential lots in the R1 zone the project is consistent with the minimum lot sizes, including width and depth. The subdivision regulations do call for natural contours of the site to be preserved, and they largely have been. And the pad developments shown on the plans are to accommodate a required drainage and water management. The access to the new subdivision is integrated with the existing tracks, same widths and track map or street layout, such as parkways. And the lot lines are perpendicular to the street in a kind of organized fashion. And again, the creek is preserved in its essentially natural state. And the lots adjacent to the creek have incorporated appropriate creek setbacks, which still leave a developable lot pad on those parcels. In terms of consistency with policies, the project is consistent with the housing major goal, as it does continue to facilitate the production of housing. In terms of land use element policy consistency, in terms of neighborhood traffic, that policy does say in part to foster suitable traffic speed, street designs should include measures such as narrow lanes and landscape parkways, which this project does include. And in terms of neighborhood connections, land use policy 2.24, it does state that the connectivity, community facilities, open space and other things should be provided, but shall not be done in a method that would create increased cut-through traffic, which have the negative effect of more traffic generation. Also, land use policy for compatible development provides a number of things to look for. One is a continuation of front setback patterns, which the project does propose. Continuation of landscape, repeat and enhance the landscape provided in parkways. Again, they are provided. The rhythm of development follows the rhythm of development of the existing neighborhoods. And in terms of street orientation, the houses will be oriented similar or the same as the existing neighborhoods adjacent. There was a question brought up about inclusionary housing. So the inclusionary housing is in the zoning regulations and is required. There isn't a condition for it because the requirement is standing in the zoning regulations. The project will need to dedicate at least one lot as affordable or pay the in lieu fee. And the dedication or in lieu fee paid must be done prior to final map recordation or otherwise provided with a written agreement between developer and the city to the approval of the community development director. And this requirement again is in the zoning regulations. There's no condition that states it because right now it's not warranted to state it unless we wanted to specify that exact timing of it. Part of the traffic analysis we'll go ahead and discuss. There was questions about why Stanford and Cuesta were chosen as the connectors and the main streets to utilize to facilitate the new properties and give them frontages. One, if the connection to Westmont to the east was continued into the project site, now there's a condition on 101 Santa Rosa where there's an unprotected left-hand turn to come onto Westmont Avenue, as well as unprotected left-hand turns to go out that drive. It has been stated by CHP or by Caltrans that it is not supported to have any more left-hand turns at this location because it is considered a safety issue as vehicles do travel at high rates of speed as they come into the city. And although they've stated that they also have no plans to make any changes to that street. So having the primary access be from Westmont would naturally create more left-hand turns both in and out of Westmont, which is a dangerous condition, which is why this was not considered. There's also some question of whether the grading of that street would work with the current engineering standard. The other aspect of this, it does not address the issues on Cuesta and Stanford, which is they are dead-end streets that don't have proper cul-de-sacs. This is an issue for some public safety in terms of emergency vehicles not being able to access a certain location by more than one direction. In terms of extending Westmont from the west, there is a creek that runs right where this kind of blue squiggly is, and that would create a some sort of impact to the creek as we would have to bridge over it. As that's not necessary, and there's other option that was not seen as a good option to provide access to this property. And again, does not address the issues on Cuesta or Stanford. There's also brought up that should Westmont be connected, they're both named Westmont and go from side to side. This connection would create a brand new cut through for all of the northern portion of the city, lots of houses. This is not supported cut through. It is not consistent with the policy to not create new cut through traffic. The people who currently live on Westmont to the west, I'm sure would see a large increase in vehicles traveled on their street. And again, increase the number of people making unprotected left-hand turns off of the one freeway. Staff does find that the connecting Stanford and Cuesta drives is consistent with the city policies and standards and the preferred option for this project. The existing street widths on Cuesta and Stanford Drive and their connection are consistent with engineering standards. It improves access for emergency services and large vehicles such as trash collection, where there's currently no appropriate turnaround or connection for these one-direction streets, one way in, one way out streets. The connection of Cuesta Drive and Stanford Drives, Cuesta Drive and Stanford Drive does not create new cut-through traffic or a new route to access Highway 1. And traffic thresholds for residential local streets per the general plan circulation element for a residential street like this is 1,500 vehicle strips per day. Even with the inclusion of the new houses and under the assumption that all the new houses would use only one street, Cuesta Drive or Stanford Drive, that would only make the expected vehicle trips about 520 trips. So that's still well below half, almost a third of what the vehicle trips. So this is not in any way surpassing circulation element threshold by adding some traffic to Cuesta and Stanford Drive. In terms of the project's environmental review, the draft initial study was open for public review from April 29th to May 29th. The comments received during the public comment period, which included the May 26th Planning Commission hearing, were reviewed. Excuse me. And additional site visits were done after the public comment was received, and pertinent information was added to the initial study to better clarify the evaluations of the project. There are no new increased or increased impacts from those additional site visits and analysis, and no new mitigation measures were warranted. And PC considered amending the initial study on July 28, 2021, and recommended adoption of that draft. I do want to state that there has been some question about and I think I've said it as well, Westmont Drive or Westmont Avenue. The street is Westmont Avenue. So staff does want to highlight that the title of the resolution finishes with the, in parentheses, 500 Westmont Drive. That should be changed to Westmont Avenue as the appropriate address. And so to recap kind of the project site is zoned for residential use and residential lots are proposed. The subdivision is consistent with subdivision regulations and engineering standards. There are no exceptions have been requested. Their creek protection and setbacks have been incorporated into the subdivision design, and the environmental review has identified impacts and mitigation measures are provided appropriately. And that does conclude staff's presentation right now. I'm happy to answer questions if they are some.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much for the report and for the updates.
Pardon me, Andy, for interrupting. You're a little bit hard to hear. I don't know. Maybe it's me. Try again. Yeah, it was me. I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll try to enunciate clearly. I know sometimes I look down at my notes. So let's see, I have a couple of questions. The first is about the parking. Certainly there have been lots of concerns from the neighbors about the lack of parking and in doing the site visit, seeing of course that there is a residential district there, so it is parking by permit only. The development does seem to be particularly low in terms of curb space that will be available in the development. And so I'm wondering, in terms of the 2 permits per lot, if that's going to still make sense. I know that we're also working on a more comprehensive review of our parking and access analysis. And so maybe if somebody from staff could kind of talk about how we're thinking about the competitive nature of trying to accommodate cars on these residential areas as density increases.
Sure. I guess the best answer, first of all, is that yes, there is a residential parking district, the College Highlands district, which is encompasses just about all the properties to the south, especially from Cuesta and Sanford Drive. Typically, a parking district is created or extended by request of the people who live there. Perhaps that can be done ahead of time or when the development is taking place. Either way, we obviously, in talking to some parking services people, we would extend that parking district to that area. I would imagine that makes the most sense. And then they would be subject to the timing and permitting as everybody else would.
I might also highlight that in terms of, the parking and how that will be accommodated off of the street, to the extent that folks who are designing homes for these lots feel like additional parking may be beneficial to the future residents, then certainly the design of the parking on site can accommodate that. And it would be very typical for a single family home to have a 2-car garage and have 2 parking spaces on the driveway, leading to the garage. So 4 off-street parking spaces is pretty much considered a minimum of what we see today. However, 3-car garages and additional parking pads are certainly possible on some of these larger single family home lots. It's certainly a different environment here as compared to some of the recent subdivisions we've seen, like San Luis Ranch, where you've got 2,500 square foot, 3,500 square foot lots with very limited ability to park on site. And in this case, I think that the designs can accommodate more off-street parking, especially to the extent that would be driven by, future residents wanting to have that parking available.
Okay, thank you. And okay, and then in terms of trees, we certainly, I know there was some correspondence, but also a lot of work that's happened between the tree committee and the 2 planning commissions and then this report. And I know that there was some additional correspondence, staff correspondence that I saw kind of late that demonstrated some, I think Alan Cooper referred to it in his letter, that there was staff correspondence from Kyle about the trees, maybe adding some additional information. And Alan Cooper in particular mentioned these 3 redwood trees that are slated for removal, and that perhaps there are ways to design around those to accommodate, to be able to get the lots in place and compliant and still be able to keep the redwood trees. I know it's hard to run all the little details on every tree, with 170 of them on the lot. So I don't want to hash over every tree, but I wonder if you could talk specifically about those trees, and then more broadly about what process has been done to really evaluate, are there trees that we mature? I know they're keeping a lot in the creek bed, but are there other trees that are still available for consideration or modification to people?
Sure. So there was some thorough evaluation by the applicant after the first planning commission hearing to see if there were trees, especially some of the larger trees, that could be somehow saved or slight project modifications. And I would say when you're looking at a map of the site with the tree locations, it looks like you could move some things this way, that a little bit, and boom, you have it. The site is not flat, so it does roll kind of down by the creek and up towards the one. And so this project has been very, I'd say, well or thoroughly designed to, one, try to meet the requirements of subdivision regulations to follow the natural contours, as well as engineering requirements for water and storm treatment. One of the things about trees is that they grow where low spots are, because that's where the water flows, and that's also where water treatment often happens, because if you're working with a natural contour, that's where it's going to go. And then there's also engineering standards for streets, street widths, street slopes, and driveway slopes. And they are, as far as the project has been proposed, it is consistent with all those. If you move a tree or move a lot line or a tree, then a street slope moves, a drainage slope moves, a location of a retaining wall, and all potential retaining walls are within what is allowed. All of that kind of dominoes with it. So again, the applicant may be able to speak of this more of the difficulties in finding ways to modify the project so that some of these larger trees could be saved. But it really was, I guess maybe it's hard to know the trade-off of how much change and exception you're now going to ask for engineering and lot sizes and lot dimension. But again, in looking at it, those changes would have been, I think Alan Cooper in particular mentioned moving the street down a little bit, but that again goes with the slope, so that the lot that's uphill from it has the right slope and drainage, and the lot below it is a consistent and compliant size, width, and depth, as well as their drainage. So again, looking at a 2D map of where trees are and where the lot lines are sometimes is a little bit misleading on how easy it would be to adjust the project.
And I just wanted to reiterate, in terms of the process that the project has gone through, it was evaluated by the tree committee. There are both one-to-one replacement plantings on site for all the trees that will be removed, plus 2-to-1 replacement planting off-site for all of the tree removals. And so in terms of city policies, when tree removals happen associated with development, like in this case where we have land zoned for development and have goals that we're trying to accomplish through that implementation of the zoning, we do have very strong policies as it relates to compensatory planting, so that in the long term, when the city continues to develop and grow, we are not at a net deficit in our urban forest. We're constantly adding to our urban forest through the street tree planting, as well as when these situations do occur, we have the compensatory planning requirement. The process that Kyle went through happened between the first and the second Planning Commission meeting. So we came back to the Planning Commission and discussed the results with them, and then they moved forward with their recommendation to the City Council for the project.
And were there modifications to the design of the language? It seems like that's when there was some clarification about box size and those types of reviews. Were there any other trees that were saved or cleared? Were there other changes to the plan based on that more thorough civil engineering tree review?
No other changes. Actually, the recommendations or the condition language about certain box sizes and the number of them to be native species came directly from the tree committee, who again reviewed and recommended to move forward with the number of trees removed and subject to compensatory planting, as you are seeing today.
Great, thank you. And I have just 2 more questions. One is for the, it keeps being referred to as a potential bike path, that little easement. What makes it potential instead of a bike pedestrian path?
So there is at this time not fully crafted drawings of how that would work. There is some question of if it's a I might get this wrong, bike path or bike trail, or there's two different things, and some require a different level of grading and things that'll be required of it.
It's
So there's
definitely
a
a
chi-
throughway. We just don't know exactly what it's going to be categorized as a
Right, there might be some exception that is warranted. There's also been discussion of that the end of that of Westmont Drive on the public side could be kind of brought down a little bit so that we really make it work. So there's a lot of options, and none of the options just weren't fully dialed in. There is still a tiny chance that none of those options work. I would not expect that to be the outcome, but that's why I made sure to use the word potential. We don't have that 100% dialed in. The applicant has provided the easement if we can make it work.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then the corollary question would be on the other end of, I guess that's Stanford going through to the west side of Westmont, that there's kind of no semblance of a pass through on that side. Obviously, there's a creek in between, so it'd be involved a bridge. Was that discussed? I think about the Stone Ridge development and how frustrating it is when you're at the top of the Stone Ridge that there's no pedestrian way to cross through and get over to Meadow Park. You have to go all the way down the street and along the sidewalk and then back over to the park. And so I don't think there's those same kinds of destinations, but I could see that would be frustrating that we're losing that opportunity in this moment. Was there some consideration of that kind of pass through?
I'd have to think back, and Luke Schwartz is available for some comment as well. He might be able to clarify more. I can't say that the location for this proposed bike path, as well as anything in this area, there's nothing that's reflected on that in terms of a bike master plan or anything like that. And if I'm recalling right, again, Luke might be able to clarify further. There wasn't that large of a benefit for that crossing there, as you still can go to Highland. The Highland's really the one that connects to Better Pass to Cal Poly. You're cutting a little bit of a corner off there and maybe a little bit of slope that a bicyclist would have to do, but the large benefit would not be there, as there's other options for travel that are just about as good.
Okay, thanks. I see Luke on.
Yeah, thanks. I hope you can hear me okay. Just to add to that, trying to get a point of connectivity for pedestrians and bicyclists to the surrounding neighborhood was something we asked for. So that connection to Westmont to the east was something that we really looked at, trying to make that work. And as Kyle mentioned, there's some final details as far as the grades and whether we can make that work from an ADA standpoint, in terms of whether that's a bike trail versus a formal paved bike path. We didn't get into a lot of details about trying to connect over to the creek. There are some policies in our active transportation plan about avoiding new crossings of creeks for bike and pedestrian paths unless there isn't a viable alternative otherwise. But at least trying to get some kind of permeability within the neighborhood to give people an efficient way to get to the east or to the south, whether on bike or on foot, was something we wanted to be part of the project.
So it doesn't sound like we had success on that goal on the one side, but not on the other.
Right. And it'd be something where it'd be improving connectivity to the existing neighborhoods to the northwest, I guess I'd say. It wasn't something where there was really that desire line between this specific project and those neighborhoods to the west. Nor was it something that was articulated in our active transportation plan or in our previous bicycle plans to provide a connection there.
And then I just will reiterate that it would create those creek impacts in terms of creating a new crossing at that location.
Right. So
Additional tree
removals. On the other hand, it would create that at least views. The creek is so much locked behind backyards. Anyway, this is probably not the right moment, but it is having it hidden away and then have streets that are tauntingly close together to be able to connect them. We'll talk about that more some other time. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pease. Vice Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. Councilmember Pease asked many of my questions, so thank you so much. Just to kind of finish up the parking district, I want to make sure I heard that correctly. is there, if that parking district would be ahead of time, is there a way that those spots could be less spots per house, per house going forward, just being that they're so tough right now already. So looking that it's very, like, people are circling, based on the comments, people are circling, looking for a spot now of those who live there. It seems as though if we add more housing and say, oh, the same parking district's available, the same spots are available, it just seems like we're not giving a 1-to-1 ratio that makes sense. So should we have less spots available?
I'm not sure that this would be the right time to dial into that in terms of what the parking services policies are on what districts and how things are divvied up.
I think
hasn't been further discussed. I think.
Yeah, I think my understanding of the process on the parking district would be that the city council could initiate the creation of a district, but that's a separate part of the ordinance where we would go through that process, working with existing property owners if there was going to be a modification to the existing district or the creation of a new district just for this new section of street. Then through that process, the city council could direct, how they wanted the district to be designed within the scope of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 of trees, I appreciate that, and that makes sense to me, except for mature trees. I still don't, if we replace a tree with a much smaller tree, and even if you get 2-for-1, it's still not going to be the same. It's still not going to be the same. So I'm just curious, like, how does that work? Are we going to do 4-to-1 when it's a 54-inch, diameter tree versus the smaller acacia trees, or what are we looking at?
So the tree section and permitting ordinance just provides us with the scenario we have, which is planning commission or somebody to act on that consistency with the requirement, which is the requirement for 1 on-site or 2 off-site. That is the language we are providing.
Yeah, nothing further is recommended at this point in time. Vice Mayor Stewart, I would say that a number of the trees are smaller, and then obviously there are some larger ones, and we're getting 2-to-1 for all of the trees removed, regardless of whether they're the smaller ones or the larger ones, and that follows the tree committee recommendation for your consideration.
Okay, that seemed disappointing, but okay. And then as far as the live oaks, I understand we're keeping 60 of them, but there's, I think, 7 coming off. And there isn't a problem with that since they're on the list of, trees we're not supposed to be removing.
Well, the trees are, in order to remove them, are subject to the process that we've gone through here. And so when it is associated with development, the city arborist will make a recommendation to the tree committee, and then the tree committee will act, and their recommendation will be carried forward through the process from the planning commission and city council. And so, in terms of staff's review, we have focused on balancing those things that come with development, and there are some trade-offs associated with that. And we have the ability to push to achieve standards and accomplish what those cities' goals are and balance. Certainly, council members in responding to the applicant's presentation may ask if they would be interested in increasing the number of trees that they might be provided. But in terms of what staff has been able to do to require more than the 1-for-1 on-site plus 2-for-1 off-site, that's kind of how we've followed our protocols and the recommendation from the tree committee. But nothing would prevent the city council from seeking more if the applicant was agreeable.
Okay, thank you. And back to the bridge crossing, I know that's not one of the recommended options from staff, but was there actual research or looking into the impact that, because it says there would be impact on the on-site creek. I'm just curious, like how much impact, what are we talking about? Would be helpful to understand.
No additional analysis went into that. The applicant proposed the project that's in front of you, and that's what we reviewed. So.
Okay.
So I think Councilmember Stewart, the point is that we didn't look at that, and I think the challenge we have is that we don't design projects for the applicants. We review the projects that are submitted, and then we look at those in the context of policy. So whether it's the tree removal policies and the replacements, those are the standards. So that's what we refer to as the standard of review. In this instance, as Mr. Schwartz indicated, we didn't look at a bridge crossing or other additional crossings because one, it wasn't proposed, and two, it would have been contrary to policies in our development standards. And so these are great questions, and we're not discouraging that, we're trying to do our best, but there's some areas where we didn't go down those paths, so to speak, because that wasn't before us. And two, to suggest such would have been suggesting in a way contrary to the adopted standards of review that the council has adopted.
Yeah, and I guess to further highlight what we did in that regard is, before even an application was submitted, the property owners, longtime property owners and the family that is looking to subdivide this property engaged with city staff to find out what the city would be looking for in terms of, its housing goals and how we would approach development of the area. They took that input from us and considered all of the available options and came back with an application for a tentative map. So it's not a vested map. So that's one thing to be aware of. And their application was sort of, if I can use a baseball analogy, as straight down the middle of the plate as possible, right? No exceptions being requested, and trying to stay as clearly within the city's development standards as possible, so that they weren't asking for any special, concessions or considerations as part of the review and approval. And I noticed that Freddie Oddie joined us, city biologist, and so Vice Mayor Stewart, I don't know if you wanted to hear more about trees, but I'm sure that Freddie would be happy to share more.
I'd be happy to hear from Freddie. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Thank you for considering this tonight. This also brings up a good opportunity for us to look at existing policies and see if there are upgrades or changes that could be made. Some of the council correspondence that came through was related to the fire prevention plan, and it listed a bunch of species that were identified as maybe suitable trees or whatnot to be planted, and some of those are contrary because they are non-native. So like I say, that was eye-opening to me, but also, like I say, it's an opportunity for us to look at those existing plans and figure out where improvements can be made. I would agree with you in the fact that losing a 48-inch tree wouldn't be replaced, simply be able to be replaced by two 5-gallon specimens. And so that's something that I'll engage with Anthony Whipple, our interim city arborist, to see what is our policy currently, and is that contemporary, or should changes be made just to make sure that we're doing as much protection as possible, especially with developments like this coming through.
Thank you so much. And please know, I very much appreciate the tree committee and the planning commission. I very much understand that everyone on these teams work hard to look at all the policies and come back to it. I just look at, especially the redwood, that really sticks out to me, knowing that there are not that many as left anymore. And those that are really big, and, I come from Northern California, are, we're seeing them get taken down for many different reasons. And I just hate to see, a tiny tree or two tiny trees replacing this massive tree that takes years and years and decades to grow. So thanks so much for all of your answers.
Right, I'm not seeing any hands up in the community, but is there anyone here to speak on public comment on this item? Now would be the time to raise your hand. Here we go. All right.
Mayor, before you take public comment, I believe Councilmember Marks has her hand up.
Oh, I did not see that. I apologize. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yes, we have a very strong policy and a major city goal concerning climate action, open space, and sustainable transportation. And I wonder if staff did any analysis from a climate action point of view and our goal for carbon neutrality, including preservation and enhancement of the urban forest in its, was there any analysis done in terms of climate action and sort of following on what Vice Mayor Stewart was talking about, taking down that many trees all at once. And trees, as we know, have the capacity for carbon sequestration, and that's been going on naturally. So that's my first question.
Sure. So we did have the applicant fill out, we adopted about a year ago, the checklist for a GHG checklist, and they did such. A statement of trees on that is that the project will be consistent with tree regulations, which, as we said, that requires the compensatory planting. There isn't any other, as far as I can see, documented thresholds for sequestration or how even the direction to analyze trees and what the what would be the perimeters for analyzing such a thing. So no, there was no additional study asked for. It's connected to any CEQA requirement, and we didn't have any thresholds to review against that.
Yeah, I just will highlight that actually, just to announce, I mean, the city with its recent climate action plan adoption, one of the companion documents to our climate action plan is a greenhouse gas emissions threshold document, of which we won an award from the American Association of Environmental Planners. And it's a forward-looking document that recognizes a variety of things that the city does to address greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time facilitates small-scale projects with respect to the process that they have to go through to evaluate greenhouse gas emissions. And so in this case, and typically with projects like this, the things that are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions are vehicle trips. And in this case, the vehicle miles traveled is very positive in that analysis because it is new housing within the city limits. And so that's something that you always benefit from a GHG emissions standpoint. And then the other is the all electric construction. And so these are buildings that will be subject to the city's Clean Energy Choice Program. They'll most likely be all electric or possibly could be mixed fuel, but would need to comply with the REACH code and the enhanced energy efficiency standards contained therein. Of course, that may be updated further before any housing gets built out here, and both with affordable housing and with our Clean Energy Choice Program, this project, the future homes will be subject to whatever the current standard is at that time. So where Council Member Marks, there isn't a specific line items as it relates to sequestration with the individual trees on the site. Our climate action plan was evaluated on its whole, and thresholds were adopted by the city council for the city in terms of how we would do greenhouse gas emissions analyses with projects such as these, and this project complies with that method.
Wait, I had another question. In terms of the lot sizes, I wanted to make sure I understood what staff was saying. No exceptions were asked. If the applicant wanted to make smaller lot sizes that would possibly accommodate affordable by design housing as opposed to luxury housing, would that have constituted an exception? In other words, instead of 23 houses, if they wanted to do 30, and if they were interested in modest housing that would be affordable by design, could they have done that, or would they have had to ask for an exception to do that?
Really the right way to do that would have been through some sort of plan development ordinance or application. I don't have the zoning regs in front of me. I'm not sure that that's available in the R1 zone. Michael, maybe you can correct me on that. It is.
Yeah, the site's over an acre. That was one of the original, discussions that we entered into. However, this, plan is intended to match the character, style, rhythm of development already on Stanford and Cuesta. It's a continuation of the existing neighborhood, and so they, based on the density standards of 7 dwelling units per net acre, potentially additional units could be added to the property. Kyle, I don't know if you have that calculation handy, but in that case, whether exceptions would have been required or not, the proposal here is one to match the pattern and character of development in the existing neighborhood, not to provide a different type of housing in this case.
And I guess I would just add that the minimum lot size for this for the R1 zone is 6,000 square feet. I believe 9 of those are 6,000 square feet in gross area, and 14 of them are under 7,000 square feet. So I understand your questions about density. They didn't try to make large lots. They really did. The net acreage is what was required for the zone.
Thank you. Okay, another question. The neighborhood traffic management plan in this circulation, in our circulation element, section 8.1.4, says that the city shall ensure that neighborhood traffic shall ensure that there are neighborhood traffic management projects and shall provide for mitigation of adverse impacts on all residential neighborhoods. I didn't see any consideration in everything that I read about the effect on the neighborhood or neighborhood wellness. So I'm curious about that. Why was that left out?
If we're discussing traffic impacts, I will ask Luke again to step in.
Luke, you don't look muted, but we can't hear you. Still can't hear you. I think Luke will get his microphone working, and I just want to highlight that neighborhood traffic management areas, as well as neighborhood wellness action plans. Those are programs in the general plan that don't specifically apply to new development as much as they apply to existing neighborhoods and to areas where neighbors want to engage with the city to improve an existing condition. And so with the neighborhood wellness action plans, we've had a lot of experience with SNAP and with our through proactive code enforcement and through implementation of the city's noise ordinance in terms of addressing neighborhood wellness challenges either by campus or in other parts of the city. And then in terms of neighborhood traffic management plans, we've seen a number of those around the city, and they are requested from time to time and evaluated carefully by transportation staff and then implemented. Luke, I don't know if your mic's working yet, but no, still can't hear you.
So my question was just whether that was taken into account. And there's another follow-up question about new development. It's the circulation element 8.1.7 says new project evaluation. The city shall not approve development that impacts the quality of life and livability of residential neighborhoods by generating excessive traffic conditions.
Yes.
So that this is something that the residents and the public comment has brought up over and over again. And again, I'm curious why staff did not include in its analysis anything about this new project and the view of the residents that it would be impacting quality of life and livability. So why not include that?
Well, we certainly did. And, you know, fundamentally, it's important to hear the public testimony, and we've heard that. And when you hear that public testimony, what that causes staff to do is to look at the standards and the thresholds that the city has adopted in its general plan and in its zoning regulations to ensure that those standards are being met. And in this case, the streets, Stanford and Cuesta, are local streets. It was presented tonight, and it's in the environmental documents and it's in the agenda report that the traffic generation from this project is below the thresholds for a neighborhood street as classified in the general plan. The width of the street is meets city standards at 34 feet curb to curb. And the narrowness of the street serves to slow down traffic and actually makes for a safer environment. So we have closely evaluated both congestion, safety, compliance with city policies. And in this case, the project doesn't exceed any of the city's standards as it relates to traffic. And so we have heard that testimony, and we've continued to respond to that testimony with factual information about how the city's standards apply to the project. And our recommendation is a result.
Can you hear me at all now?
Yeah.
Ooh, for some reason, my computer switched from my headset to my laptop microphone for no reason. So figured it out.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Michael hit on exactly what I was going to mention. It was evaluated. With any project like this that adds traffic to a residential neighborhood, there's two things we look at, and it's actually articulated in our circulation element policy 8.1-7. For new projects, we look at two things. We have established volume thresholds and speed thresholds for local residential streets. Our volume thresholds are adopted by the council as part of the general plan, establish a maximum desired daily traffic volume of 1,500 vehicles per day. The existing volumes on both Cuesta and Stanford Street are about 200 to 300 vehicles per day. The project would be adding about another 220 vehicles per day, which would remain less than half, 50% below those volume thresholds that we've adopted. Even if you wanted to play overly conservative and say this particular project may generate more traffic than the average residential home and double that, you'd still be about 40% under the thresholds we've adopted. And similarly, what we do is we take a look at the existing speeds on streets within the vicinity to see if there's a concern about existing speeding and if a new project would have potential to exacerbate those issues. And the prevailing speeds on both Cuesta and Stanford were within our established thresholds, which is 25 miles an hour. I think one was about 19 miles an hour. The other one was 24 currently. And looking through our records, we haven't received any applications or requests for neighborhood traffic management on either of these streets. And usually that we'll be getting those requests coming in if there's existing issues that need to be addressed. So it's absolutely something we look at within our policy thresholds. And in this case, we didn't see the concern that those thresholds would be exceeded by the proposed project.
Okay, but you didn't actually evaluate the quality of life and livability of the neighborhood, it sounds like to me. You just looked at the traffic standards. Is that correct?
It's something that's considered in developing those thresholds. The policy language you mentioned regarding livability and evaluating adverse impacts on residential neighborhoods, policy 8.1-4 is actually specific to city-led traffic management projects. So if the city was leading a neighborhood traffic management project, a traffic calming project, the policy is that that process should consider that the improvements that are being considered address the issues without creating new adverse impacts on the neighborhood, emergency vehicles, or pedestrian and bicycle access. There's always certainly subjective discussion and considerations for neighborhood quality. And it's always a hot topic with concerns to traffic. And what we try to do is certainly consider input from the community, but also use the objective thresholds that we've developed as a city and evaluate projects based on those.
And I'll say in terms of those quality of life policies, we do have residential project objectives in the land use element, and the project was absolutely weighed against those objectives. Kyle shared in his presentation some of the imperatives from that specific policy that are areas where this project complies. And I would say that, you know, Stanford and Cuesta Drive, it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's an area that provides a substantial quality of life for its residents, but I don't think that quality of life has to be exclusive to those residents. This is development of a piece of property that was originally going to be part of the very same subdivision and could have homes on it, just like the ones that are on Stanford and Cuesta, but this particular property owner and family decided not to develop at that time. And so a little bit later, the development is now being considered. It meets all of the city standards. We have evaluated it from the standpoint of quality of life. And I think that if the subdivision is approved and homes are developed, then this neighborhood will continue to provide an amazing quality of life, not only for the existing residents, but also for the new residents as well.
Okay, thank you. My last question has to do with the red-legged frog habitat. That was the issue that was brought up by Robert Schroeder, PhD. And he goes into this is in agenda correspondence that we received. He goes into great detail about the stream being red-legged frog habitat. And that red-legged frog is an endangered species that needs to be protected. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't find it in our mitigated neg deck. Was there any consideration of the presence of red-legged frogs in the stream and the, I believe, 8 pools of water that are sort of part of the stream complex there?
Yes, so there is great consideration made to that testimony, which was also provided to the Planning Commission at both of the Planning Commission hearings. Freddie Audi can speak specifically to the staff evaluation of the applicant's biologist has submitted protocol studies and information to share so that we could do that evaluation in the initial study. So Freddie can speak to that, and then also the applicant's representatives, when they make their presentation, I'm sure will be happy to touch on that topic as well.
Thanks, Michael. You know, I did meet with Mr. Schroeder on site. We walked the creek downstream and looked at a couple of the pools. It's marginal habitat. There's the potential for red-legged frogs to occur. The source populations are on the other side of Highway 1, however, so way up in the headwaters of Stenner Creek. And so for frogs to be dispersing across, kind of from those refugia areas coming into, these creeks specifically, it's highly unlikely just with the big barrier that Highway 1 is. And like I say, just based on surveys that I've completed over the past 16, 17 years working for the city, haven't seen large rhinid species or red-legged frogs or even bullfrogs in small drainages like this. So for habitat to support larger frogs like this, it has to have special qualities, and the depth of the pools just doesn't seem consistent with what red-legged frogs are looking for. So I would support Kevin Merck's evaluation of the site. it's something that we can do ongoing surveys for, just in case they happen to show up, but not for something, in my opinion, anything more for this development here.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of my questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. And with that, we will move on to public comment, and we will start with the applicant, who I believe, Teresa, can you clarify, do they get extra time at 10 minutes? Or they
Yes, 10 minutes, but it is also 8 o'clock. I don't know if you want to do a recess before we go to public comment.
I don't need a break, but do my colleagues need a break? I can't see them. Hold on.
All right, five minutes would be awesome. I would love
Okay,
that.
so we will be back, let's say at 8:10.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Ms. Rollins?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Okay. So thank you guys, and thank you, Kyle, for your presentation, and thank you, council members, for hearing us tonight. I'm Katie Rollins. I'm a civil engineer at Canon, and I'm representing the applicant. We really appreciate the input that we've received from city staff, the Planning Commission, the Tree Committee, and the public throughout this process. And we want to emphasize that this project was designed to meet all the city standards, policies, and regulations, and to not cause controversy or upset the neighborhood. As you can tell from the maps that Kyle has showed, and that you've seen mentioned in the multiple correspondence letters, this project is a completion of the much larger College Highlands subdivision from the late 1950s. The applicant, the Meinholds, grew up on this property, which they purchased from the original Highlands developer, Mr. Morgan Flagg. Now, the Meinholds are older, and it's finally time to see the property developed to fit the neighborhood and to be consistent with all the current city policies. Mr. James Flagg is Morgan's son, and he's actually been helping the applicant throughout this process. We've been working diligently with the city for the last 2 years to prepare for these public meetings we've had in the last few months, and to create a project that is consistent with all of the thoughtful city regulations, including the creek setbacks, circulation requirements, stormwater measures, and lot design. We've heard multiple comments and concerns from the public, and we've worked closely with the city over the last few months to address every item that was requested of us. This included providing revised grading concepts and considerations and a memo carefully reviewing all of the large trees on site to see if we could save any for protection, and a memo and additional site visit from the staff biologists to ensure we were minimizing the impacts to the creeks and any special species. I'm here today to answer any questions you guys have. Also, Tim and Andy Meinhold, the applicants, Jim Flagg, the consultant to the owners, and Kevin Merck, our consulting biologist, is also here to answer questions. With my remaining time, if you would like Mr. Merck to give a few comments on the questions from Councilmember Marks, he's available to do so. Thank you.
Okay, you know you have 10 minutes, but we can always circle back with you. Okay. All right, great.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. In that case, Becky Keene. Becky, I see the words talking permitted, but then I also see muted. So I don't know if that's on your end or if that's.
Yes,
think
it is on her end.
that's on your end. Ms. Keen, so if you need to unmute yourself on your side. Now I don't see you at all.
She may have finally moved over to a panelist and she would
Okay.
still need to unmute herself.
Okay. And if you're new to Zoom, if you want to hover your cursor over on the left bottom corner is where the mute button is.
There we go.
Yeah, there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. And I'm going to put it on video too.
Great.
So let's see if you can see me. Well, let's see. Hold on. I apologize.
No problem.
I do this for work too, which is really, oh, there I am. Okay.
There you are, Becky. Yes.
Hey, everybody. Hi, council members.
Hello.
I'm Becky Keene. I live here on Stanford Drive, and I wanted to introduce my neighbors. Well, I'll go first, but Ginger and Dolphy Check, they're here. Their computer's off the hickey today, so they wanted to come over and use mine. So I hope they can have their chance to talk as well.
Sure.
Okay. They live here on Stanford Drive as well. So I'll just move over. So thank you for taking this time to listen to my concerns. I was just wanting to ask all of the council members if you've all had the chance to read the agenda correspondence that was sent to you in regard to this project. And I can get confirmation on that.
We don't necessarily engage directly during this time, but yeah.
Okay, well, the reason I asked is that I think there's some very compelling arguments that were written in today. I did read all of the agenda correspondence, of course, including, sending my own in. But it's just, I listened to the city planners and, they put a very positive spin on this project. And it's they've mitigated every issue that could possibly happen. And common sense will dictate that you really need to come over here and look at this property, look at Stanford Drive, imagine 500 cars, and I still think that's a very low number, driving up and down Stanford Drive. Well, right now it's still very dangerous. The other problem I have, and I brought this up at the last planning meeting, is the city planners saying that a congested street is a safer street. Well, not when it's half students, because now you have a congested street and then you have students that don't slow up if it's congested or not. So then you have people like me trying to back out of my driveway right now, and it's can get pretty sketchy. So I just wanted to really compel you to come over here and really look at this, and perhaps the lot too, instead of just a diagram that they're providing to you. I know the Meinholz. I don't know them well, but I've known them over the years. I have nothing against them. They have every right to develop their property. I'm not trying to make this like something they can't do, but I just think it can be done in a more responsible way. And I just learned something listening to you all tonight too from Michael Codron about that really Westmont West opening was never really discussed. It was never brought up. They never looked into what it would take to build a bridge over it. And that's the first time I've ever heard that. And I've been at every meeting, the tree meeting, both planning committee meetings, and now this one. So it's just seemed strange to me that that would be the one that's finally picked up on. And so I'm running out of time, but again, you can't really see this without coming here yourselves. And I just would really request that from you if you care about your neighborhoods and get a real good feel about what this is going to do to it. So thank you. Can I turn it over to Ginger?
Yes.
Genevieve.
Go ahead
Genevieve.
and do it that way. And thank you, Becky, because that also reminded me that I needed to ask my council members for their ex parte disclosure. So we'll wait till the end of community input, and then City Clerk, if you can remind me to make sure that we do that.
Okay, thank you.
Move on to deliberations. Yes.
Thank you, and good luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
And this is Genevieve Check.
Thank you.
Good evening, and I'm one of the residents on Stanford Drive, and we are, all of us, eager to reassure the applicant that we do not want to cause further duress in their efforts to solve this and resolve this and sell their property. However, it's also our earnest wish to see that accomplished without permanent loss to our planet. And tonight we've heard people refer to counter proposals, one by Alan Cooper and a hydrologic study made by Mr. Rob Schroeter, which drew the attention to the city staff of certain details that hadn't been discussed as alternative. At the outset of the first meeting, the tree committee meeting, the engineering firm assured us that it was too late to make changes. I found that rather arrogant. At the second meeting, the planning commission meeting, Mr. Jorgensen complained that it was a lost opportunity, and Mr. Tyler Corey assured us that changes could be incorporated into the plan. So what we are asking is that rather than take this as a fait accompli, you refer again and review the hydrologic study, which found details about the creek, which had not even been assumed, and the assertions from the EIR were contradicted. And the Fish and Wildlife Service recommended further mitigation. That was entirely ignored and never incorporated into the analysis that Mr. Codron and Kyle are saying they've done. So we don't see any evidence of a proper response or reply to that, nor to the discussion around some of the biology in the trees. In fact, the first time, forgive me, that your biologist, your city biologist, visited the site was with Mr. Schroeter himself. So we are asking you to keep a very creative and flexible review open. And in tonight, in your discussion and reflection, some of the questions were not fully answered. That became clear, and we were grateful that they were raised by 3 of your council members, and that you give another meeting to this. We were told we should sacrifice one of the planning commission meetings in order to enable you to have 2 meetings to give a full analysis and review of this plan. Therefore, we hope you take this opportunity, take a second meeting, use the time in between, go back and review those analyses, and make sure these questions are fully answered, and make sure that the options have been fully rejected. We want to thank you for participation that we've been enabled to have in a Zoom meeting. And we ask that you understand that our efforts are sincere and idealistic and for the well-being of everyone and the planet, nature, safety. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Keen, is there another person in your group that would?
Yes, there is. This is Adolf Check.
Okay.
Ginger or Genevieve's boyfriend of 54 years.
Yeah, it's been out so many
So
years.
cute. Okay, I wish we had extra time to talk about that. I'm sure that's the real story, but go ahead, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm used to coming after my wife. I cannot accept the data used to project traffic densities arriving at figures like 520 vehicle trips per day. It seems to me that this does not take into account the potential impact resulting from SB 9 finalized presently in Sacramento. Additional dwelling units and junior additional dwelling units certainly must enter the consideration of the projection of traffic density, population density, and traffic density. To ignore these simply is to shut one's eyes to what is coming. The idea of 4 vehicles per unit and the alternative that was mentioned of 6, it might be 6 instead of 4, seems to me grotesquely out of reality when you think of what is the policy of the state to increase density by allowing these extra units. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else in your group?
No, that's it for us. Thank you. Thanks for
Okay.
accommodating us.
Of course. Of course. Thank you. Okay. Robert?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you very much, Council, for hearing our presentations today. My name is Robert Schroeder, and I'm a longtime resident of the neighborhood near the project, and I do hold a PhD in conservation ecology. I am concerned that there are significant biological resource and community issues that have not been adequately addressed. And I am requesting that the City Council take the necessary time to obtain and consider the relevant information before making a decision on this project. The issues include the biological assessment not being adequate, the habitat corridor and the wildlife being adversely impacted, and the health and safety concerns of residents on Questa and Stanford Drive that suddenly will face a huge increase in vehicle traffic. How safe would you feel with 200 to 500 additional cars driving past your home? Although some planning commissioners did attempt to address and seek clarification on the points of concern, the community director made it clear that he did not support any further delay in the project approval. In our opinion, it is literally impossible to have full clarity of the impact of this project without knowing the number of structures and exact size of homes that are to be built. Furthermore, the city appears to have gone out of their way to accommodate a single property owner at the expense of over 60 other adjacent property owners. The concerns we have are in line with the City of San Luis Obispo's vision and priorities, including maintaining open space, biological life, wildlife corridors, aesthetics, and health and safety of residents. The city and project failed to reach out to the community during this project's design to see if there was some ways to minimize community and wildlife impact. This lack of outreach to the community was notably mentioned by Commissioner Wolken, who characterized the Westmont project as a missed opportunity to consider a more flexible design to better protect the riparian corridor and to reduce grading and to preserve more trees. Commissioner Dandekar further commented that it's a beautiful site and we pride ourselves of the scenic qualities of our city. And she wondered why we could not have incorporated ways in the riparian corridor to provide enhanced access for the public to enjoy the area without damaging the ecology. We wholeheartedly agree with these sentiments. In regard to the biological assessment not being sufficient, I requested during the July 28th Planning Commission meeting that at the very least, the commission adopt a mitigation measure to ensure adequate protection for the red-legged frog, which would have consisted of nothing more than a thorough sampling of the stream and surrounding habitat with U.S. Fish and Wildlife approved protocols. This is something that should have been done over 2 years ago. This is still necessary because the project's biological assessment failed to identify suitable habitat for the red-legged frog that is actually present along Twin Ridges Creek. This is according to discussions with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This habitat has sustained other amphibian species with similar life history constraints and biological requirements, proving that habitat along Twin Ridges Creek is suitable for red-legged frog. The resolution was not discussed by the Planning Commission. Given these inadequacies, it is my opinion that the biological assessment for this project is not sufficient for declaring a mitigated negative declaration. I am just about done, sorry. Furthermore, the project, despite what the commission has been led to believe, is a living, thriving remnant of intact riparian forest. I have literally hundreds of videos of wildlife using this riparian corridor. These animals do not live exclusively within the riparian forest. They need surrounding upland habitat that will be filled in by homes and yards.
You need to finish your thought.
I strongly request that the City Council reevaluate this project so that these information gaps can be filled in and perhaps a project with reduced scope and impacts can be designed. This will benefit all beneficial uses of this area. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have Marianne Stansfield. We have her twice, so I'm not sure if that's too. Anyway, nevertheless, she's next regardless. Marianne?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hi. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Marianne Stansfield with, I'm at 653 Stanford Drive. I'm going to read from a prepared statement about the proposal. We're not against the development and feel that the property owners have every right to develop. We just want to make sure that this is managed in a thoughtful way that considers the impact to our established neighborhood. I'm hopeful that tonight will be just the first City Council review of this plan and that the City Council will take their time to hear out concerns and comments of the people who live adjacent to this project. I sent an email to the City Council outlining me and my husband's concerns about this development, which backs right up to our backyard fence line. The topics detailed were concerns about things that all of my neighbors have been discussing: parking, traffic, tree and plant removal, specific to us on the southern end of the property, that in our assessment is not properly being mitigated and will change the aesthetics and the skyline of the neighborhood. Also, concerns about a PG&E pole and lines that are inches from our fence line at the top of our sloped backyard. In truth, even though we went to the Planning Commission meetings, we still don't fully understand what is proposed directly on the other side of our fence at the top of our property, which is a part of a huge slope that continues up on the other side of our fence, and we'll need retaining walls built on the other side to create the identified drainage system, where currently there is a large vegetative buffer slated for removal. How will that affect our fence line, the slope on our side of our fence? We're concerned, and we're concerned about the grading and other issues. We invited the Tree Committee and Planning Commission to our home to see why we have such concerns, but no one came to see. I now invite you all to come see our backyard and how the slope is a concern on both sides of the fence. In closing, there are two enormous eucalyptus trees right on the other side of our back fence as well, around the 50-inch diameter size, that the Tree Committee actually recommended not to be removed, and are a thriving ecosystem filled with birds and butterflies and squirrels and a red-shouldered hawk, or possibly two. This is their hunting ground. Just last week, I saw a hawk fly out of our yard with a mourning dove in its clutches and land in the eucalyptus tree for a late afternoon meal. It's incredible what we witness on a regular basis, and all of that is slated to be removed. We are hopeful that in the end, there will be some modifications and perhaps tree policy changes, as Vice Mayor Stewart recommended, perhaps it's 4-to-1 for these larger trees, and that more information will be provided as deemed necessary to this development regarding our points of concerns. Thank you for your service to this community, to you all, and thank you for this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Stansfield, was there somebody else in your household that wanted to speak? Is that why your name was up twice, or was that a mistake?
No, my sound on I have two devices going because the sound wasn't working, so apologies.
I just wanted to make sure. No problem. I just wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to speak that wanted to. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm not seeing any other hands from the community. City Clerk?
I'm not either.
Okay, and then though I don't know if the applicant wanted to circle back.
Yeah, Mayor Harmon, I can maybe help a little bit here at this point. Heard some testimony that staff would like to respond to, but I do think it's also important to hear from the applicant's biologist, just as the person who conducted the studies as it relates to red-legged frog. If we could go to that testimony from Mr. Kevin Merck, and then to Freddie Audi, for him to reiterate his understanding of the studies and his conclusions as well. I think that would be great. And then I have a few follow-up comments based on the testimony that I could address as well.
Sounds great. So we'll start with the applicant, with City Clerk keeping time on that, and then go to Mr. Audi and then Mr. Cadron.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Kevin Merck. Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Not to get into a disputing match with Mr. Schroeder, but it's clear that he does not have the expertise with red-legged frog. I've worked with this species for 30 years. We have done habitat assessments and protocol level surveys throughout the city and through the county. I'm one of the county's qualified biologists and have worked on projects like this for my entire career in the Central Coast. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage. We work with the Fish and Wildlife Service regularly. I've been approved, authorized by the Fish and Wildlife Service to survey, handle, and deal with the red-legged frog on many projects. when we looked at this project, we did follow the site assessment guidelines. We did not produce a site assessment report, but in our biological resources assessment, we clearly went through the program that the Fish and Wildlife Service has set up. So to say that we did not do an adequate level of review is not correct. And so, like I said, I didn't want to get into a dispute, a back and forth kind of match, but clearly we have extensive experience. My other colleague that worked with me on this project is a PhD herpetologist who did all her graduate work in red-legged frog. So, just as Freddie looked at the site, it does not have the adequate pools. It's clearly overrun with non-native species, as well as some of the wildlife that comes through there are predators from the red-legged frog. So I'm happy to answer questions, but like I said, this is this is par for the course with people wanting to refute the evidence that you put forward, but we did follow protocols defined by the Fish and Wildlife Service, defined by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Our reports have been used by the city and the county on numerous projects like this. We're technical experts. We don't have any kind of stake in this project, but clearly we're here to disseminate information and make sure that the decision makers have the adequate ability to make a decision on a project.
Mayor Harmon, can I ask a question of Mr. Mark?
Sure.
Thank you. If there were a red-legged frog, hypothetically, what would be the additional mitigation measures? Is there a timing or an additional distance from the creek? What are the kinds of mitigation measures if it had been a red-legged frog site that worked?
Well, we start with a records review. And like I said, we have done surveys in the city and throughout this area in the county for well over 20 years. And so we have, as well as there's many lay people who are out there surveying and hiking, and we have lots of outdoors folks who can identify red-legged frogs. But if we would have found a pool, or we would have found a more perennial, or at least a prolonged intermittent stream course that had the necessary hydrology, I heard that brought up earlier. So this site, this is a very ephemeral feature. It only flows in response to rains. It does have a few pools that we went and investigated after Mr. Schroeder brought this up. And we went back, took a look at them, and they are just very shallow. So they're easy. If a large frog like the red-legged frog were in there, they're easily preyed upon by things like raccoons, like possums. So I mean, the raccoon, and remember, this is a very narrow corridor going through town. And we've surveyed all through Garden Creek, and we've surveyed the trapezoidal. This goes into a concrete ditch, and we have surveyed these pools also, and we have not found any red-legged frogs. Only predators, bullfrogs, raccoons, and other wading birds that prey on.
Sorry, I understand that. But if there had, just for our knowledge, if there had been, is the mitigation for red-legged frog additional distance or time of year for the development?
Well, there's a number of protection measures that would be in place, and if we would have found a breeding site versus just a movement corridor, that would affect it. And so a breeding site, we would have wanted extensive setbacks from the breeding site, especially if this was a really high quality movement corridor between ponds that have genetic exchange happening. We would have required even a larger setback than the city's policy, or at least we would have recommended that. I mean, the city has their policies in place. They are protecting the riparian corridor. This thing will still be movement habitat for these common species that are out there. And if a red-legged frog, I mean, the goal of the Endangered Species Act is to get these red-legged frogs back to a sustainable population and occurrences throughout the Central Coast and throughout the state of California. But for us, the likelihood of a red-legged frog occurring in here is very low.
Thank you. You answered my question.
Councilmember Marks, do you have a question for the same person, or are you just waiting for another?
No, I had a had a question for the same person.
Okay.
So the creek only flows in response to rains. In terms of considering what it would take to put a bridge over it from the biological protection point of view, how far away from the different setbacks do you think you would need a bridge? to protect the environment there.
And so you're asking for the setback of the abutments, or what are you asking?
Yeah,
specifically?
Yeah, the
Well,
abutments, right.
You know, we have had bridge projects that have gone forth in red-legged frog habitat. And as long as the protective measures are in place during construction, the bridge can be constructed. Although if there was a breeding pool in a stream that was going to be crossed, we would recommend that the bridge be relocated away from that breeding site. I mean, one of the problems we're having with these creek corridors is that the human activities in there are detrimental to the species. So one person brought up, being able to utilize the creek. A lot of times when we're dealing with the Fish and Wildlife Service or the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they ask that we keep humans out of there. So it's really just a balancing act. And of course, we're at the urban interface at this particular location, and it's not an easy one. We do have a lot of non-native vegetation in there. There's a lot of plantings that have occurred in this. And at one point I was recommending that we have some non-native species removal and replanting of natives so that we could try to restore the riparian corridor.
Thank you. So I want to make sure I understood. You did review the red-legged frog issue, but you did not include it in the report, or at least I couldn't find it. Was there any reason not to say, we looked for the red-legged frog, but we couldn't find the sufficiently supportive habitat for that?
Are you sure?
I mean, it just wasn't mentioned. So that's why it raised a not a red-legged, but a red flag for me. It's like, why not just say you did consider it?
Well, if you go to Appendix D, we have an extensive table of our species. And so in that bio report, that is how we vet this stuff out. We go through a whole special status list, a target species, and we provide the habitat requirements. So it is in the report. And even as I'm culling through here, we have gone through and talked about its habitat. We characterize the stream course. We characterize that there are no pools in the stream course on the property, and none that we could find. We also, like I said, we followed the site assessment guidelines that the Fish and Wildlife Service has. So we looked within a mile of the property. We also looked at other known records, and the closest records that have been brought up in several instances are from 1939. And so, we're talking about a species that is very rare now, unfortunately. And luckily in our area, it is the stronghold of the species. So it is much more common here than in other locations. So, but like I said, it's in the report. And we definitely paid attention to it because it's an important species for us, and we would not omit a red-legged frog.
And thank you.
And then Freddie, do you have any follow-up with respect to just, your on the record statements with respect to red-legged frog?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Having done flood control work on that drainage in the past, supporting of what Kevin said, it's an ephemeral stream. It's not perennial. We haven't seen, the pool habitat that's required for red-legged frogs. 2-foot depth is the minimum. Typically, they're looking for 3-foot depth so that they can get away from those, the predators and stuff like that. One other predator that Kevin forgot to mention is feral cats. As I'm typically out doing my surveys at night, you can see the little beady eyes looking back at you from feral cats. Huge potential predators. And so, there's a whole list of potential predators that are out there. And just based on the stream conditions, from what I saw, it's not supportive of red-legged frogs. Getting back to the open space protection, that's exactly why we have a program like this. And like I mentioned before, where we do have California red-legged frogs is across Highway 1 in the very headwaters of Stenner Creek, which was conserved by the city a number of years ago. Having those stronghold populations is paramount because, as Kevin mentioned, these animals are very few and far between. And the city has done a good job on protecting habitat, like Stenner Springs, like the Waddell property at the very backside of the Irish Hills, where we do have populations of red-legged frogs. Putting those properties into conservation is one of the major intents of the open space program.
Thank you. And if I might, Mayor, I'm going to address some of the other public comment that we heard, and thank you. Just make a few comments. I think what there was one comment about, staff not looking at Westmont West until tonight, or a person who's been involved hearing about Westmont West for the first time tonight. But I think you did hear from Luke Schwartz discuss how that discussion occurred early in the process in terms of vetting the potential for a creek crossing and transportation connection in that area. There was a comment just to follow the conversation we just had about red-legged frog and biology, that commenters are looking for evidence of a proper response within the environmental document. And I think that what I want to highlight here is that we received the input and verified that the facts don't support that input. And so in terms of the evidence of the response, there is a factual basis for the conclusions that are made in terms of impact, no impact, recommended mitigation measures in the initial environmental study. I think that our record is very strong on those points. And so we're hearing, concerns being expressed, and that is pretty common practice. That's what happens with the California Environmental Quality Act. Our goal here is to get factual information out and available so that decision makers can base their decisions on that information. And so we take that public testimony from, starting with the tree committee and all the public hearings we've had. Every time we've heard this input, nothing new has come up tonight that would cause us to need to bolster the record or revise the record in any way. This is all information that we've heard, and we've verified that our recommendation and the information in the initial study is factual and correct. I wanted to just highlight that this is a project under the Housing Accountability Act. And so the discussion around 5 hearings is one where, the Planning Commission took 2 hearings to get through this item. Ultimately, they didn't need an additional hearing. They acted and made a recommendation to the City Council 5-1. We did let the Planning Commission know that, hey, there's only 5 hearings. And so why, the reason for us not wanting this to be the last hearing in front of the City Council is because if something new came up, if new information came up, and it's the 5th hearing, you're essentially forced to act on the project, either to approve it or deny it. And if new information gets raised, we don't really want to put you in that position. We want to have the opportunity to go back, evaluate that, clarify anything that needs to be clarified, and come back to the City Council with our recommendation. At this point, no new information has been surfaced that would cause us to need or recommend more time for decision making. There was public testimony about the interest in seeing the exact home sizes and locations. What I want to highlight is that this is a subdivision map, but it's not a vested map, which means that the applicant is allowed to propose a subdivision and have a subdivision approved of the property. It's consistent with all city standards. If they wanted to vest rights as it relates to fees or as it relates to the ordinances that are in effect today, they would have to show the entire development plan of homes on the property. So they've given up rights in order to be able to have this subdivision, and then they will pursue development in the future, and it may be individual homes are developed by individual property owners, or there may be a builder that comes in to build 1 or more homes. But in any case, design review will still be required in the future. So all of the property, all of the lots that front on a creek are required to have design review. And then as well, if a builder comes in to do, more than 4 homes as one builder, then a design review is required. And Kyle, you may have even more accurate information as it relates to design review if all of the homes are subject to that requirement.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. All of the proposed lots adjacent to the creek are required to go through architecture review, as well as all lots that are adjacent to an existing residence. So there was actually only 4 or 5 of the lots that don't require architectural review if they're individually developed.
Right. But again, if they are constructed by a builder, if a builder comes in that wants to do, more than 4 homes at one time, then that is subject to design review regardless of the location. So, there is a further design review that'll be part of the process. But I just want to highlight that, again, the project being subject to the Housing Accountability Act, one of the outcomes that a member of the public was speaking towards was a reduced scope project with reduced impact. And of course, under the Housing Accountability Act, especially for a project like this, where the proposal is consistent with all city standards, there's no density bonus being requested, there are no concessions or other exceptions. The reducing the project size or disapproving of the project does require the specific findings based in fact and tied to health and safety for the council to take those types of actions. And just following the public testimony and the presentations that you've heard tonight, staff hasn't heard anything where we would change our recommendations, and we're not aware of any evidence in the record that would be factual basis for reducing the number of homes, the size, number of lots within the project at this time. So that's just my feedback at this point, and happy to answer any questions that the council might have.
Michael, could I ask you just briefly to address the application of the affordable housing standards as they relate to this subdivision and how those will be applied on a go-forward basis?
Sure, yeah. So a couple things. One is that we're updating our inclusionary housing requirement. So that project has started, and next year that a new ordinance will come before the city council after a lot of public engagement and a traditional San Luis Obispo process of outreach. We will have a recommendation to you on a revised inclusionary housing requirement. This project will likely be subject to the updated inclusionary housing ordinance, just depending on timing. But at this point, the project is subject to the inclusionary housing requirement, and that can be, met in a number of ways. Typically with a subdivision like this, we will either get a payment when the final map is recorded based on typical home sizes. We calculate 5% of the building valuation is required to be paid as an in lieu fee. So that could be anywhere from $25,000 to $45,000 per lot, most likely, for these properties, and that will translate into many more affordable housing units that the city would be able to support than the one affordable housing unit that would be required if they actually provided the affordable housing on site. And so those options are available. We will work with the developer on how to comply with the ordinance. You won't find a specific condition of approval related to affordable housing because it is an ordinance requirement that is implemented through the subdivision map and building permit process.
Okay, Councilmember Christensen, we do need to do ex parte disclosure. So why don't we take a pause and have everybody, of which I have none. I'll just go ahead and start real quick. And Councilmember Christensen on ex parte, please.
No ex parte.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
No ex parte.
Councilmember Pease.
No ex parte.
And Vice Mayor Stewart.
No ex parte.
Okay, great. Councilmember Christensen then.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a while since we've done one of these. I can tell we've kind of lost our chops maybe a little bit. We used to be approving housing and specific plans and everything else. And this is the first housing we've seen for a while. And so it's kind of understandable that I think a lot of the questions we had, based on public comment, but also on just the fact that we haven't dealt with housing for a while, seem to have been kind of reminders of how our policies work and how we look at projects. And I did want to just reassure the public who made a few comments or maybe watching that I, for one at least, spent quite a bit of time over in the neighborhoods around this project. And I did go up Stanford and up Cuesta and on either end of Westmont, as well as just driving around Highland and Jeffrey and some of the other connectors over there. I know that neighborhood quite well, and I just wanted to kind of refamiliarize with myself with it. So it isn't, just so you know, council rarely makes decisions about things like this affecting neighborhoods without doing some of that homework. We don't just sit up here and take everybody's word for it. So wanted to be reassuring about that. I also wanted to kind of support Mr. Codron's statements about, the work that gets done before it gets to council. By the time projects like this get to council, they have been extensively vetted. They have been extensively commented on from the public often and from experts, as well as our advisory bodies. And those comments have been investigated and dealt with as well as possible. So we get things that are fully analyzed and are fully evaluated and have been compared to all of our general plans and policies. And that doesn't mean that the result is always perfect, and there might not be things that haven't been looked at. But for the most part, especially with the fantastic staff we have these days, we are seeing the end result of a whole lot of work with the best efforts made to look at a project carefully and completely within the context of our standards and policies and guidelines. And that's, it's really important, I think, for us as council and for the community to kind of step back and take a look at the context. This is a housing project on property that's been zoned for RE1 development for decades. So it's not a surprise that someone is now finally wanting to develop it. And even though I know personally, and I think all of us can relate to the idea where you have this empty lot next to you and it's empty for years, when it gets developed, it's very upsetting. And everybody's heard about me screaming about the bike boulevard going in front of my house. And I've screamed about a few other things happening in my neighborhood personally to me. So I know that emotional reaction, and it really does feel invasive, and it's difficult. It's hard to deal with change. But that doesn't mean that we as a council just go, okay, fine, we won't change anything. That's not what our quality of life policies say, and that's certainly not what our general plan says, and how we is not how we make our community grow. We keep these things in mind, but we don't. We keep our standards and policies in mind. And I think Michael put it at the beginning, kind of the best. This is a project that just kind of goes straight down the line. It doesn't have anything controversial in it. It has things to discuss, but it's a pretty straightforward project. If you look, what you're looking at in terms of traffic is a small closed loop, very small closed looped local little addition to a street, Cuesta and Stanford connecting. 18 homes are going to be coming off that. Compared with if you connected Westmont, that's why I drove around this neighborhood, you would have more cut through traffic than anybody who's talked to us has even dreamed about. It would be, I think, a total disaster circulation wise. I also think and know, and all of us can relate to this, anybody can relate to this, adding another busy entrance and exit onto Highway 1 directly onto Santa Rosa not only would be objected to by Caltrans, but would be very dangerous and also not good circulation planning. And then again, experience tells me that when you're talking about bridges over creeks, and especially we're not thinking a little bridges over creeks with a road on them, you are talking major engineering, and you are especially on the slope apparently, and you are talking always creek impacts, negative creek impacts. Every single discussion we've had about creek bridges have talked about this. So we know this without having to be told this, but we can have people tell us this more if we want more detail. But it was kind of like, again, obvious to me in that area to why traffic circulation was recommended with the way the layout it is. The other thing that I've dealt with so many times is trees. We love our trees. We want our trees. It's not appropriate policy to change our policy based on this project, although we may want to consider changes in our tree policy later. So I don't know if Mr. Audi actually meant that for sure, but we have a tree committee. It takes a look at the tree plans and it makes its best recommendation. And one of the things you have is if you have a rock and a hard place. You can't have development on vacant land and not do something to trees and vegetation and or animals and biodiversity and that kind of thing. And you make your line is if it's development and it's planned and it's part of our general plan, that's what wins. And then you have mitigations, tree policies, community recommendations, planning commission review that tells you how to mitigate that to the best of their knowledge, their expertise, and keeping in mind, again, our policies and our standards. So, I don't want to lose trees either, but trees can be replanted. They are a renewable resource. Even the biggest trees will die. I personally do not think redwoods are going to last much longer, maybe even not within our lifetime in our climate here, unfortunately, unless our mayor can get out there and make things happen on a global level. Little joking, but I just don't, you don't not develop a piece of property because there's trees on it. That's not how it works. You don't, if it's talking about changing open space, then you're talking about trees come first. So anyway, I certainly understand the concerns raised. I think it's appropriate to raise them and to question and make sure that they really have been looked at. But I do have full faith and confidence that our staff has examined this from all of the good planning perspectives, that we've gotten good advice from our planning commission and from our tree committee. And I, for one, am supportive of this project. I think it will make a nice little completion. That little loop will be actually a nice thing for those streets, make it easier to turn around, make it easier for fire engines, safer. So yeah, that's where I am.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. I had a question for staff in terms of the concern raised by Mr. Check, and that has to do with the SB 9, the effect of SB 9, also the effect of legislation that says that you can subdivide a lot into possibly 4 mini lots. The ease with which people can do ADUs, granny units, tiny homes, the way that R1 has been densified by state legislation. Have we at all considered that in terms of our traffic impact analysis? So that's my question. Are we pretending like what the state is doing to the R1 neighborhoods doesn't exist? And I for one think that it would be important to at least include that in the analysis about what could happen. So thank you.
Well, I'll give a little bit of information here, and then Luke can speak to the transportation impacts and how they're evaluated today, since we've made this shift from our focus on congestion to the focus on vehicle miles traveled as it relates to new development. But that doesn't mean we don't look at congestion. And as he shared, there is about a third of the potential of a local street being developed in this area. So SB 9 just, it's passed the assembly now and is going to the governor's desk. I think that the city is writing an opposition letter, and I think that that's being coordinated by the League of California Cities and our Channel Counties group. SB 9 is problematic because of the loss of local control, although some of the policies embedded in SB 9 are consistent with city housing element objectives and with just city housing goals in general. So SB 9 could allow for minor subdivisions of single family lots to improve ownership opportunities of smaller lots. So whereas right now, a property developer could, a homeowner could have 3 units on their property. They could have the primary residence, they could have an accessory dwelling unit, and they could have a junior accessory dwelling unit within the footprint of the primary home. With SB 9, potentially it could be 4 units. And this is something that we're aware of. In total, SB 9 is intended to respond to a housing crisis across California that exists because of the difficulty of entitling housing projects, particularly in coastal California. By many estimates, the whole state of California is deficient by about 3.5 million housing units. And so these are the kinds of things that the state legislature is now needing to do in order to help support decision-making at the local level. But of course, again, to the extent that it takes away local control, the city of SLO would be in opposition. Luke, in terms of the analysis of additional units on a given property, how have you and your team looked at that?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we talk about our long-term traffic forecasting, we're looking at build out of the city. We have an idea of how many housing units total and what population we're planning for. And I don't know that these bills necessarily change that. If we update our general plan, those projections would get updated accordingly, and we'd update our traffic forecast. At a project specific level, we go off of the data that we found to have the strongest correlation to how much traffic a project's going to generate, which is at this point the number of dwelling units currently proposed. As we look at like this project, for example, we're not really even on that threshold of hitting our local street traffic thresholds. We're well below it. So we could say if we're close, maybe we give some more consideration. Will these lots be subdivided further? Is there potential? And maybe be more conservative in our conclusions. In this case, we're not really even close. There's growing data on what kind of traffic ADUs and those type of more kind of smaller, gentle density type of development patterns generate. Generally, they're less intensive than a equivalent single family house. We've had similar concerns with multifamily, with apartments in SLO with the intent to have individual bedrooms divided for multiple residents. And we've actually done data collection once projects that have those type of features have been built. And what we found is the data in terms of how much traffic they generate is pretty much right in line locally to what the national averages show for a standard apartment with a total number of bedrooms. We have a much more robust transit system and walkable and bikeable community than most of the communities that this data is averaged based on throughout the country. So it's something that as more data comes about, we absolutely use that as part of our toolbox in assessing project by project analyses. And at this point, we don't go into a project assuming that it's going to be subdivided further or that every unit's going to have an ADU, but it's something that we consider as we refine our practices moving forward.
So the short answer is no, you haven't analyzed it. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that, in that we have analyzed similar projects where there was concerns about higher occupancy per unit than you might see on another type of housing product, and found that there wasn't a higher traffic generation. In terms of ADUs specifically, or policy changes that would allow for more streamlined duplexes, triplexes, we haven't updated our home models or analyzed specific projects differently thus far because those policies haven't taken place in our community.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Marks, I think ultimately the standard of review that we use is the adopted rules at the time that the application is deemed complete. And so that is the standard of review. So if there are a variety of housing bills that every year go through the legislative process, it would be speculative for us to determine which bills would move forward under which form, and then create an arbitrary standard based upon staff's interpretation of what bills might pass through the legislature. So we don't do that, and for that specific reason. Now, with respect to ADUs, if I could ask and direct Mr. Schwartz to speak to what is the standard of review for looking at ADUs for purposes of a subdivision, and what is required under state law?
Sure. For ADUs currently, they come in on a project by project basis. We don't do focused comprehensive traffic analysis for individual units. When we have a larger subdivision that has that potential, it's certainly something we factor into how we estimate our traffic calculations. As a rule of thumb, we use unadjusted national rates for analyzing traffic generation for residential, knowing that as a community, we have inherently much lower auto mode shift than other types of sites where this data is mostly collected. It's generally collected in suburban cities because it's very easy to lay down tube counts and collect data. In our community, we err on the side of being conservative. We know the data that we use to estimate traffic is generally higher than what our auto traffic rates are like. If there's more refined data that gives a better picture about a more proliferation of ADUs and ways to adjust our estimates based on those, we'll start applying those practices. But currently, it isn't a best practice and something that we've seen a need to specifically round up for in our project analyses. And it's not something that's required. In fact, at the state level, for CEQA purposes, we can't even make conclusions about traffic impacts based on congestion or other measures of driver delay. It's no longer a basis for making a conclusion on environmental impacts. It's focused primarily on vehicle miles traveled. In our community, housing projects have a net positive benefit in terms of regional vehicles miles traveled. And so those types of projects from like a CEQA environmental standpoint are not going to frequently have traffic impacts based on analysis of congestion.
I think I want to just add one point on ADUs and SB9, which is that those provisions of the city code and potentially of state law apply to all homes across the city. Like every neighborhood has the right and option to pursue that. So it isn't something that's just associated with this new development in terms of how many homes could be developed, but the other homes on Cuesta, Stamford, and off of Highland and in this neighborhood have that potential as well. And so it's something that, as Luke mentioned, depending on how development patterns progress with respect to this issue, with respect to the pilot programs that we're working on right now for our housing element, like our missing middle housing project, our flexible density housing project, those are pilots that will be tailored to achieve a specific number of housing units, maybe 300, maybe 500 units as a pilot project. And what we'll be able to learn over time when we get to our next general plan update is how those development patterns have shifted in the city and what we need to do about it from an infrastructure standpoint, et cetera, to manage the flow.
Okay, are we good there then? Then Vice Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. So I kind of wanted to respond to a couple different things. One of the thoughts that has come out from many of our emails and even a couple today was, we know it's just going to be students. And while I totally appreciate that there probably will be some students in these houses, I also look at these houses or this housing possibility as a great opportunity for young working professionals, for people that live near Cal Poly or that work at Cal Poly and Cuesta, young families who want, have their kids right there at Bishop's Peak. So I just really kind of wish that wasn't always the message of it's all going to be students, it's going to be rentals, and it's going to be 8 people in a house. It may be, but may not be for all of the houses. I lived there on Cerro Romaldo, and I have driven by on Stanford and Cuesta many times. And in fact, of course, recently took a quick drive by to check it out again, just making sure I had a good memory still. I will still be sad about the redwood tree, but I do trust the tree committee, and I trust the planning commission. I hope that the future homes still have a possibility of keeping a few of the more mature trees, but that's not something I'm saying has to happen. I fully understand what our rules are, but just saying as just a personal thought. I appreciate the traffic analysis. I understand that it feels like a lot when we talk about traffic increasing to the community. And at the same time, the traffic analysis has, there's been so much time spent on what we can and can't do on the different roads. So I appreciate all the work of staff and really giving us some guidance around that. I also understand it's not a vesting tract. And so I really look forward to when these future potential homes come to the council. I'm very curious as to what these will actually look like and the plans of who will be able to live in these. And Councilmember Christensen, I understand the concept around a bridge and how expensive it can be. I just would have liked to have had a little bit more explanation in the packet so that I felt that I was making a full decision versus a guesstimate decision. So that's just my statement on the bridge. And just, that I have a complete faith in the Planning Commission and the trees, and I greatly appreciate all of your hard work. And please know that my questions are to get clarity and to understand what we're doing. I appreciate that the clients spent a lot of time identifying how they can make this as smooth and possible as to not ask for exceptions. So I definitely appreciate that pre-work as well. Just would have loved to have some clarification a little bit earlier on these, and makes me feel like some of the projects coming forward with housing would be great to have maybe a 221 or something of that sort. Seems like that some of us still had quite a bit of questions. So while it has been a while, I'm excited to have more housing. This is what we have as a major city goal, and we want to help people get into housing. So I hope that some of this can be more affordable, but I also understand that when we have more housing, people move out of the other houses and we can kind of do a little shift through the rest of the city. So thank you so much for all of this work, and look forward to moving forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you. And I just have one brief question before I proceed with my comments, which is just about the eucalyptus, and if somebody can provide a clarification. I know that Stanfield was talking about those particularly large mature eucalyptus. I'm thinking 33 and 34, maybe the tree numbers. And I just wanted to make sure that was, it looks to me like those are the ones that are in where the, because of the slope and the grading and where the retention basin needs to go. I think that's where these are getting caught up in versus the concern about eucalyptus and fire. And the reason I'm asking is because I just want to make sure that we don't have a foundational flaw about regardless of size, health, maturity, that we're taking down eucalyptus necessarily. Can somebody comment on the large eucalyptus?
Sure. So you're right. I think there's two large eucalyptus that are just near the southern property edge, and those are basically right on top or directly adjacent to the large stormwater treatment and retention facility. Again, that's kind of the low part of the central part of the lot, and for grading purposes, it's just the spot that makes the most sense. It'd be really difficult to do that anywhere else on site. There was also a eucalyptus that is within the creek corridor. That is being removed in connection to the fire mitigation measures that were requested by our fire marshal, and a fire protection report was provided by the applicant essentially removing non-native trees from the creek riparian area. Those also need to be replaced, though, and trees that are removed from the specifically from the riparian area will almost for sure be replaced, but with a native species within the corridor there, so that we have no net loss of riparian corridor. So you're right, there's two different reasons for those specific eucalyptus trees, but both were supported by staff and evaluated for to be warranted to be removed.
Great, thank you so much, I appreciate that. Thank you to my colleagues for your comments covering a lot of remarks. I'll try to be brief. Thank you to our staff. I know this was quite a grilling, and as always, your professionalism and thoroughness is greatly appreciated by all of us. And as always, thank you to the community. They're smart, impassioned, and you make better projects. And so I appreciate all these comments, even if it doesn't always seem to go the way you might want. I do think that we get better projects that strike the right balance for our community. So thank you for that. And thank you to the applicant. I think that what we do have is a project that does save 91 trees, has a good setback, has a respect for the neighborhood environment in terms of what's been there historically and what could be there in the future, and so a little bit of a bike connection and those types of things I think are really appreciated. The things that parking, that's programmatic. It doesn't have to do with, I don't think, with this project, and we got to do better. I think that as we look at parking, that it needs to have some rational nexus with the amount of linear footage of curb, and so in an area. So I think you're right to be upset about the way the parking is. And we do need to do better as a community. We need to have less single car ownership, and we need to have people. There needs to be a cost associated with free storage on our city streets. It's not everybody's right to be able to have as many vehicles as they want, etc. You can have as many vehicles as you want. You just don't necessarily get to park them all for free on our streets. So I think that is, and we have lots of tools to do that. And I think there could be enforcement and traffic calming and all those kinds in the future. So those concerns are not ignored, but I don't think that they influence what is happening with this project. And so I think that our planning, as Vice Mayor Stewart said, and Councilmember Christensen, in terms of the vetting that this project has gone through, I don't have any modifications or changes at this time, at least. Thank you.
Okay. I don't really have anything to add. So would someone like to make a motion? Councilmember Christensen?
I'll go ahead and make a motion. I assume that Councilmember Marks has her hand up from before. I can see it, but
I think she just put it down. Oh, now she just put it back up. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
Well, this is a question for the city attorney. I'm wondering how much discretion the council actually has tonight.
Not much.
Are you the city attorney? I know you went to law school, so did I, but I want to hear this from the real city attorney, okay?
Well, I concur with Councilmember Christensen. There is fairly limited discretion for a project like this that meets squarely our development standards and falls within the scope of the Housing Accountability Act. There really would have to be a discrete, articulated health and safety adverse impact that could not be mitigated through a condition in order to deny a project like this that conforms completely with adopted development standards and provides housing covered by the Act.
You're muted, Jan.
I just want to say thank you.
Okay, with that, I do appreciate actually the comments from the public. I want to be clear about that. It did give me a lot to really take a look at when I was in the neighborhood, just to make sure that, that I felt that those concerns were addressed. I go back to, in terms of parking, I go back to our mayor's highly cogent question when about the second meeting she ever was in, when she talked about people's garages and driveways. And, so it's not just street space. It's also what are the folks, what are we doing with our garages and driveways? So again, parking isn't the issue right here, but it affects everything. Anyway, I appreciate all of the work that has been done by staff in responding to our property owner and our neighborhood and our and the council and everybody else. And with that, I will go ahead and move staff recommendation, including the 2 additional conditions that they mentioned that the planning commission recommended, the tree condition and the construction communication plan. I think that will be very helpful to that neighborhood.
Great. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. City Clerk?
Councilmember Christensen,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stewart,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yeah, yes, yes.
Mayor Harmon.
Yes. And with that, it passes 5-0. All right. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we will move on to council liaison reports and communications. If anyone has any. I don't see any hands. Councilmember Marks.
Well, very briefly, I'll just give you a little update on the integrated waste management situation. Tomorrow we have our full board meeting. We understand that the supervisors on September 14th are going to consider a formal resolution of withdrawal from the IWMA. And that would then trigger the 30-day notice provision. So it looks like it'll be the middle of October. So if anyone's interested, you can go to the agenda, the Integrated Waste Management Authority, agenda for tomorrow. But what we're looking at is pausing as much that we possibly can in terms of expenditures, because we don't know the financial impact of the withdrawal of the county at this point. We're also in the midst of considering whether to hire an interim executive director or a permanent director. My own feeling is that we should go for the interim, because it's only when we have a consolidated new integrated waste management authority, whatever it will be called, slow recycle or slow waste, that we will be in a position to actually hire a permanent executive director. And what I've heard so far, all of the urban areas in the city, in the county, all the cities and all the CSDs at this point are sticking together with the IWMA. I hope that this holds as we go forward. But we are making a lot of progress behind scenes. And so I just want to assure people that in terms of public service to the public and protecting the environment, we're going to maintain the status quo as much as we possibly can. And there's a lot of enthusiasm about doing that and then shaping a new organization in the future. So I don't know if would our city manager want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Marks. I just first would appreciate Councilmember Marks and Pease for their sage advice moving forward and their counsel. I briefed both Councilmember Marks and Pease late last week and over the weekend that the city managers met last Thursday night. There was consensus amongst the city managers that we all wanted to remain united and that continue the IWMA. It was the most cost-effective and efficient way to meet our current mandates, and those mandates pending in the future. So there's a strategy that's been laid out for the city managers to talk with their representatives. And certainly we'll take our cues from the entire board, how we can support the IWMA. There are a lot of moving pieces between fees and the lack of an executive director, upcoming changes with 1383, and the pending negotiations with the county, should they pass their resolution to withdraw with respect to assets and any sort of financial resources. And so Councilmember Marks has done a yeoman's job of keeping the team moving forward in a very thoughtful and pragmatic way. And so a lot of kudos to her for her leadership.
All right. Yes, thank you. And Councilmember Pease.
Thank you. I want to let folks know that the RTA bus maintenance facility is progressing really well. They're wrapping it up in the next few months. They'll be starting their move in mid-December. So it's right around the corner. That's the new construction that you see on Prado Road right by Elks Lane. It's a big facility, big project, and it's going really well in terms of schedule and keeping within their budget as well.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Then with that, we will adjourn. The next regular city council meeting will be on September 21st at 6 p.m. via teleconference. See you all then and have a great evening. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.